The day they tied Clara Whitmore to that fence like an animal, the whole town of Red Hollow came to watch her break. 22 years old, orphaned by a drunk's debt, wrists bleeding against the rope while the sun cooked her alive. The banker already had her fate decided, shipped to the city brothels before sunset. Everyone laughed. Everyone except the widowed rancher who rode in with ghosts in his eyes and rage in his fists. What happened next turned a dying girl into a legend and a broken man into something dangerous. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's story travels. The rope cut deeper every time Clara tried to move her wrists. She'd stopped crying an hour ago. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, not with half of Red Hollow standing in a loose semicircle around the fence, waiting for her to collapse. The August sun hammered down on her bare head, and sweat stung the cut above her left eye, courtesy of Samuel Pike, the banker's nephew, who dragged her through town by her hair that morning. "Look at her," someone muttered from the crowd. "Thinks she's too good to beg." Clara kept her eyes on the dirt. She'd learned young that looking people in the face only gave them permission to hit harder. The town square of Red Hollow wasn't much to speak of, a collection of sun-bleached buildings that had seen better decades, a general store with a crooked sign, a saloon that never closed, and the First Bank of Red Hollow, which was neither first nor much of a bank. More of a loan shark operation dressed in respectable paint. Her father had done business there for years, borrowing against promises he never intended to keep. Now she was paying for every broken promise he'd ever made. "Worthless drunk died owing me $200, Samuel Pike's voice boomed across the square. He stood on the bank steps like a preacher at a revival, vest buttons straining against his belly. Left nothing but debts and this girl. The way he said girl made Clara's skin crawl. "Should have drowned her when she was born," old Mrs. Henderson called out. Several people laughed. Clara recognized the sound, the same laugh that followed her through childhood, through every charity meal, through every pitying glance that came with a whispered reminder that her mama had run off and her daddy drank himself stupid every night. Clara's throat burned with thirst. They'd tied her up at dawn, and the sun was past its peak now. 6 hours. Maybe 7. She'd lost count around the time her knees started shaking. "The stagecoach will be here within the hour," Pike continued, pulling a gold watch from his pocket, with the flourish of a man who enjoyed theater. "Got a contract with a gentleman in Carson City. He runs a establishment, always looking for girls willing to work hard." The crowd knew exactly what kind of establishment. A few men exchanged knowing looks. One woman made the sign of the cross, then immediately turned away as if absolution meant ignoring what was about to happen. "Willing," Clara finally spoke, her voice cracked and raw. "That's a funny word for it." Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You got a better way to settle your daddy's debts, girl?" "Because I'm all ears." She didn't. That was the hell of it. 3 months ago, when Thomas Whitmore had stumbled drunk into Pike's poker game and bet money he didn't have, Clara had been washing dishes at the saloon trying to save enough to leave town. She'd been close too, almost $40 hidden in a coffee tin under her bed. Then her father died choking on his own vomit, and Pike had come for everything. The house, the tin, even the dress Clara had been saving for her eventual escape. Now she wore a torn cotton shift that barely covered her knees, wrists bound with coarse rope, displayed like livestock. $200, Pike said again, addressing the crowd like he was doing them a favor by explaining. Plus interest, plus fees for storage of the property, since the girl been living in that shack rent-free since her daddy died. That brings the total to, let's call it 300 even, generous considering. Generous, Clara whispered. The word tasted like ash. A young boy, couldn't have been more than 8, threw a rock that hit her shoulder. His mother grabbed his arm, but she was smiling when she did it. Clara felt the bruise forming already, adding to the collection Pike's nephew had started that morning. The heat was getting to her. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision, and her legs trembled with the effort of staying upright. If she fell, they'd probably leave her in the dirt until the stagecoach arrived. Maybe that would be easier. Maybe unconsciousness was a mercy. "She don't look like much," a man's voice called out. "What's a Carson City gentleman want with something that used up?" Clara lifted her head at that. Used up. She was 22 years old and had never been touched by any man. But the truth didn't matter in Red Hollow. It never had. The town had decided her story before she was old enough to write her own name. "She'll do as she's told," Pike answered smoothly. "That's all that matters." The crowd pressed closer, a living wall of judgment and curiosity. Clara recognized most of them. There was Martha Green, who used to pay Clara's father to chop firewood, then complained the job was sloppy. Daniel Cross, who'd proposed to Clara when she was 16, then spread rumors she'd turned him down because she was saving herself for rich men. The widow Calloway, who'd once told Clara that her mother had been a woman of loose morals, and you can see where that blood goes. Every face held a memory of small cruelties, tiny cuts that added up to this moment. "Stagecoach is coming," someone shouted. Clara heard it then, the rattle of wheels, the rhythm of hooves on the hard-packed road. Her stomach dropped. This was real. This was actually happening. Pike descended the bank steps with the casual confidence of a man who'd never lost a thing in his life. He walked to Clara, close enough that she could smell tobacco and sweat, and grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her to look at him. "You make trouble on that coach," he said quietly, his voice too low for the crowd to hear. "And I got cousins in Carson City who'll make sure your first night in that establishment is one you'll never forget. You understand me, girl?" Clara jerked her chin free. "I understand you're a coward who hides behind debts and contracts." The slap came fast, snapping her head to the side. Her cheek exploded in hot pain, and she tasted blood where her teeth cut the inside of her mouth. The crowd gasped, not in horror but in excitement. This was entertainment. This was the best thing that had happened in Red Hollow all month. Pike raised his hand for another blow, but someone in the crowd shouted, "Rider coming!" Everyone turned to look. A single horse appeared on the eastern road, moving at a steady trot. The rider sat tall in the saddle, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb the sunlight. Even from a distance, Clara could see the width of his shoulders, the way he held the reins with the ease of someone who'd been born on horseback. Behind him, a smaller horse carried 3 children, 2 boys and a little girl, all watching Red Hollow approach with wide eyes. "That's Boone Callahan," someone whispered. The name rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Clara had heard of him. Everyone had. The widowed rancher who lived in the mountains with his children, barely coming to town except for supplies. His wife had died 2 years ago in childbirth, and rumors said he'd buried something vital along with her. Boone Callahan rode into the square and stopped 20 feet from the fence where Clara hung like a scarecrow. Up close, he looked like a man carved from stone and bad weather. Maybe 35, maybe older, hard-living aged people fast out here. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days, and eyes the color of a winter storm. Those eyes landed on Clara, took in her bound wrists, her bruised face, her torn dress, and something shifted in his expression. Something dangerous. "What's this?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Pike stepped forward with his politician's smile. "Private business, Callahan. Nothing that concerns you." I asked what this is. No smile, no politeness. Just a man who expected an answer. Pike's smile tightened. "The girl's father died owing the bank money. She's being transported to Carson City to work off the debt. Legal and proper." "Legal," Boone repeated. He dismounted in a single smooth motion, handed his reins to his oldest son, a boy of maybe 12 with his father's jaw and suspicious eyes. "You got papers?" "Of course I got papers." Pike pulled a folded document from his vest. "All signed and notarized. $300 owed, plus, how much did you loan her father?" Pike hesitated. $200, but with interest and fees. "So you're selling a girl to a brothel over $200 of gambling debt." Boone took the papers, scanned them with the quick efficiency of a man who could read a contract for lies. "Debt her father incurred, not her." "The law says—" "I don't give a damn what the law says." Boone's voice didn't rise, but every person in that square felt the temperature drop. "I asked you a question. You're selling this girl over $200? Clara watched this exchange with a strange detachment, like she was floating somewhere above her body. The pain in her wrists had become background noise. All she could focus on was this stranger who'd ridden into town and decided to care when no one else had. Pike's face flushed red. "Now you listen here, Callahan. This is none of your concern. The girl is property of the bank until the debt is—" "She's not property." Boone stepped closer to Pike, and despite Pike being a larger man, he took an involuntary step backward. "She's a person, and you touch her again, I'll break your hand." The threat hung in the air like smoke. "You threatening me?" Pike's voice climbed an octave. "In front of witnesses? I'm making a promise." Boone turned to Clara then, and for the first time in hours, someone looked at her like she was human. "What's your name?" "Clara." Her voice came out as a whisper. "Clara Whitmore." "Clara, you got anybody in this town who'll speak for you?" She almost laughed. The absurdity of the question hit her sideways, and she felt hysteria bubbling up in her chest. "No, sir, nobody." Something flickered across Boone's face. Recognition, maybe, or memory. He knew what it felt like to be alone. He pulled a leather pouch from his belt, untied it, and poured silver coins into his palm. They caught the sunlight, winking like stars. The crowd leaned forward collectively, greed and curiosity warring on their faces. 300, you said?" Boone counted out the coins with deliberate slowness, stacking them on the fence post next to Clara. "That's 300, plus 50 for the interest you were going to claim, plus another 50 for damages to the girl since she's bleeding and you've clearly been knocking her around." Pike's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You can't just—" "I can, and I am." Boone counted out the final coins. $400 cash. That clears her debt with enough left over to cover any fees you were planning to invent. He turned to face the crowd then, and Clara saw what they saw. A man who'd survived 2 years of grief and come out the other side harder and colder and infinitely more dangerous than before. "Anybody here got a problem with that?" Silence. The kind of silence that pressed on eardrums and made people check their breathing. Pike grabbed for the money, but Boone's hand caught his wrist. "First you cut her loose. This is robbery. This is business." Boone's grip tightened until Pike gasped. "Cut her loose." Samuel Pike Jr. appeared from the crowd, knife in hand, and sawed through the ropes binding Clara's wrists. The moment she was free, her legs gave out. She would have hit the ground hard if Boone hadn't caught her, one arm around her waist, steadying her like she weighed nothing. "Easy," he said quietly. "Take your time." Clara's hands had gone numb from the ropes. Pins and needles shot through her fingers as blood flow returned, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. Boone held her until she found her balance, then released her carefully, like she might break. Pike snatched the money off the fence post, counted it twice with shaking hands, then stuffed it into his vest. "This isn't over, Callahan." "Yes, it is." Boone picked up the contract Pike had dropped, ripped it in half, and let the pieces fall to the dirt. "The debt's paid. The girl's free. You come near her again, we'll have a different kind of conversation." The stagecoach rolled into the square then, kicking up dust. The driver pulled the horses to a stop and looked around in confusion. "I was told there'd be a passenger." "Not anymore," Boone said. "Turn around and head back to Carson City." The driver looked at Pike, who was still clutching his money like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Pike gave a jerky nod, and the stagecoach rolled away, leaving nothing but wheel ruts and unanswered questions. Clara stood there, shaking, unable to process what had just happened. Her brain felt like it was moving through honey. Freedom. She was free. After hours tied to that fence, after months of fear, after a lifetime of being unwanted, she was free. But free to do what? She had no home, no money, nothing but the torn dress on her back. "Can you ride?" Boone asked. Clara blinked. "What?" "A horse. Can you ride one?" Yes, a little." He nodded and walked to where his children waited. The oldest boy handed him the reins without being asked, his eyes never leaving Clara, suspicious, protective. Boone lifted the little girl, she couldn't have been more than 5, and set her on the saddle. "This is Rosie," he said. "Rosie, this is Miss Clara. She's going to ride with you." The little girl had her father's dark hair and her mother's eyes, blue as summer sky. She studied Clara with the brutal honesty only children possessed. "You're bleeding." "I know, sweetheart." "Papa makes bleeding stop." Maybe later. Boone lifted Clara like she weighed no more than his daughter, settling her in the saddle behind Rosie. Clara's head spun from the sudden movement, and she grabbed the saddle horn to keep from falling. "Hold on to my daughter," Boone said. "Don't let her fall." Clara wrapped her arms around the little girl, feeling the warmth of her small body, the steady rhythm of her breathing. Real. This was real. Boone mounted his own horse, and the two boys climbed up behind him without needing instruction. The older one still watched Clara with those suspicious eyes. The younger one, maybe 8 years old, just looked tired, like he'd forgotten how to be surprised by anything. "Where are we going?" Clara asked. Boone looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. Not pity, not charity, something rawer than that. "Somewhere you won't be tied to a fence like an animal," he said. "Somewhere those bastards can't reach you." He turned his horse toward the mountain road, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. As they rode out of Red Hollow, Clara looked back once. She saw Pike standing on the bank steps, rage and humiliation warring on his face. She saw the townspeople staring after them, already composing the gossip they'd spread. She saw the fence where she'd spent the worst hours of her life, ropes still dangling from the post like a warning. Then they rounded a bend, and Red Hollow disappeared behind the hills. The ride took 3 hours. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, jerking awake every time she started to slip sideways in the saddle. Rosie chattered at first, asking questions about Clara's name, her favorite color, whether she liked horses. But eventually the little girl fell quiet, lulled by the steady rocking of the horse's gait. The mountains grew around them like a wall, pine trees blocking out the sun, the air cooling as they climbed. Clara had lived her whole life in Red Hollow, and had never been this far into the wilderness. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, all sharp rocks and sudden drops and trees that had survived 100 winters. The older boy rode in silence, but the younger one, Ethan, she heard Boone call him, kept twisting around to look at her. "You really going to stay with us?" he finally asked. Clara didn't know how to answer that. "I don't know where else to go." Ma used to say people who got nowhere else to go end up exactly where they're supposed to be. It was such an adult thing for a child to say that Clara felt her throat tighten. "Your ma sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Ethan turned back around, and Clara heard everything he didn't say in those 2 words. The ranch appeared as they crested a final ridge, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley between 2 mountains. The main house was bigger than Clara expected, 2 stories of dark wood with a wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. A barn stood 50 yards away, and beyond that she could see paddocks and pastures stretching toward the tree line. It should have been beautiful. It should have felt like a sanctuary. Instead, it felt abandoned, like a place where Joy used to live before it packed up and left. Boone dismounted and lifted Rosie down, then reached up to help Clara. She slid from the saddle, and her legs nearly buckled again. The world tilted sideways, and she grabbed Boone's arm to steady herself. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. Clara tried to remember. "Yesterday, maybe." He muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse, then guided her toward the house. The boys led the horses toward the barn, without being told, moving with the practiced efficiency of children who'd learned responsibility too young. Inside, the house was clean but cold, furniture covered in dust sheets, windows that needed washing, a kitchen that looked like it had been used for basic survival, and nothing more. Boone sat Clara in a chair at the kitchen table and disappeared into the pantry. He returned with bread, cheese, dried meat, and a jar of preserves. Set it all in front of her without ceremony. "Eat." Clara's hands shook as she reached for the bread. Pride told her to refuse, to say she was fine, to maintain some dignity. But hunger overruled pride, and she ate like a starving animal, barely tasting the food. Boone watched her for a moment, then turned to the water pump and filled a glass. Set it beside her plate. Disappeared again and came back with clean cloth and a bottle of whiskey. "This is going to sting," he said, pouring whiskey onto the cloth. He cleaned the cut above her eye with surprising gentleness for a man with such rough hands. Clara winced but didn't pull away. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did in town. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." The certainty in his voice stopped her. She looked up at him, this stranger who'd paid $400 for her freedom, and saw something in his face that made her chest tight. "Why?" Boone was quiet for a long moment, dabbing at the cut with careful precision. "Because I know what it's like to be alone in a crowd of people, and I know what it's like when nobody helps." He stepped back, examining his work, then nodded once. "That'll heal clean. The bruises will fade in a week or so. I don't have anywhere to go, Clara said. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I don't have any money. I don't have family. I can't pay you back. Not $400. I'll never be able to. I'm not asking you to pay me back. Then what do you want? Boone looked at her for a long moment, and Clara saw something move behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe, or desperation. My wife died 2 years ago. This house has been falling apart since. The children need someone who can make this place feel like a home again. Someone who can cook real meals and mend clothes and remember when Rosie's birthday is. You want a housekeeper? I want someone who'll stay. He said it simply, like it was the most reasonable request in the world. Someone who won't leave when things get hard. Someone who'll look at those children and see people worth fighting for. Clara's eyes burned. I'm not qualified to raise children. I barely raised myself. Neither am I, Boone said, but we're all we've got. From somewhere upstairs, Clara heard footsteps, the soft pad of small feet, the creak of floorboards. The children were listening. Of course they were listening. Their entire world had just shifted, and they were trying to figure out if this strange woman was a threat or a salvation. Clara thought about the fence, about Pike's hand on her chin, about the stagecoach that would have taken her to Carson City and a life she wouldn't have survived. She thought about the coffee tin with $40 that Pike had stolen, about the dress she'd never wear, about all the small dreams she'd given up because survival took everything. I'll stay, she heard herself say, at least until I figure out where else to go. Boone's shoulders relaxed slightly, and Clara realized he'd been holding tension she hadn't noticed. Fair enough. He left her alone then, walking out to the barn where his sons were tending the horses. Through the window, Clara watched him move, all coiled muscle and controlled grief, a man who'd forgotten how to be anything except strong. Rosie appeared in the doorway, hovering like a ghost. You can come in, Clara said softly. I won't bite. The little girl crept closer, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. She climbed into the chair next to Clara and stared at her with those two blue eyes. Are you going to be our new mama? The question hit Clara like a punch to the chest. No, sweetheart. I'm just going to help your papa take care of you for a while. But you're going to stay here, in the house? For now. Rosie considered this, her small face serious. Do you know how to make flapjacks? Clara almost smiled. I do. Good. Rosie hopped down from the chair. Papa tries, but he always burns them. She disappeared as quickly as she'd appeared, leaving Clara alone in the silent kitchen. Through the window, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the barn, a lamp flickered to life. The boys' voices drifted across the yard, young and uncertain. Clara looked down at her hands. The raw marks on her wrists where the rope had cut, the dirt under her fingernails, the tremors she couldn't control. These were the hands of a girl who'd been tied to a fence and left to die. These were the hands of someone who had nothing, but maybe nothing was exactly what she needed to be. Maybe empty hands could build something new. She stood slowly, testing her balance, and began to explore the house. Upstairs, she found 4 bedrooms, one clearly Boone's, still holding traces of the wife who'd died there, a hairbrush on the vanity, a shawl folded across the foot of the bed. The boys shared a room with bunk beds and scattered toys they were probably too old for. Rosie's room was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and a chest, but someone had painted stars on the ceiling. The 4th bedroom was empty except for a bed frame and a chair. Clara stood in the doorway, looking at the space, and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. She went back downstairs and found the kitchen again, started opening cupboards, taking inventory, flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar. Enough to work with. She found an apron hanging on a hook and tied it around her waist, then rolled up her sleeves. When Boone and the boys came back from the barn, they found Clara at the stove, stirring a pot of beans she'd set to soak. She'd swept the floor and washed the dishes piled in the basin. Small things. Nothing miraculous. But Wyatt, the oldest boy, stopped in the doorway and stared like he'd seen a ghost. Ma used to make beans on Fridays, he said quietly. Clara froze, suddenly terrified she'd overstepped. I can make something else if… No. Boone's voice was rough. Beans are good. They ate dinner in near silence. the scrape of spoons against bowls the only sound. Clara barely tasted the food, too aware of the three children watching her like she might disappear if they blinked. Too aware of Boone sitting at the head of the table, his face unreadable. After dinner, she washed the dishes while Rosie hovered nearby, asking questions that ranged from profound to absurd. The boys disappeared upstairs without saying goodnight. Boone stood on the porch smoking a cigarette, staring out at the dark mountains. When everything was clean and put away, Clara found him there. "I should probably know the rules," she said. "About the children, about the house, about whatever this is." Boone was quiet for a long time, smoke curling from his lips. "There aren't many rules. Don't hurt them. Don't leave without saying goodbye. Don't make promises you can't keep." "That's it?" "That's it." Clara leaned against the porch railing, feeling the day finally catch up with her. Her body ached, her head throbbed, her wrists burned where the rope had cut. But she was here, standing in the cool mountain air, breathing freely. "Why did you really do it?" she asked. "In town. Why did you pay that money?" Boone took a long drag on his cigarette, eyes distant. "Because when my wife was dying, she looked at me and said, 'Don't let the world make you cold.' And I've been cold for 2 years. And today I saw a girl tied to a fence with nobody helping, and I thought, if I don't help her, if I just ride past, then I'm everything she was afraid I'd become." The honesty of it stole Clara's breath. "I won't hurt them," she said quietly. "Your children. I promise." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Boone reminded her. "I'll try not to hurt them," Clara amended. "I'll try to make this place feel like a home. I'll try to be worth what you paid for me." "You're not property, Clara. You don't have a price." "Tell that to Red Hollow." "I already did." He flicked the cigarette into the darkness. "Now you need to tell it to yourself." He went inside, leaving Clara alone on the porch. She stood there for a long time, watching stars emerge in the black sky, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. The wind moved through the pines like a whisper. And for the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could stop running. Even if she didn't deserve it, even if it wouldn't last. Even if the morning brought regret and second thoughts, and all the complications that came with being a girl, nobody wanted living with a man who'd lost everything. For tonight, she was free, and that would have to be enough. Clara woke to the sound of roosters and realized she'd slept past dawn for the first time in years. Panic hit her chest like a fist. She scrambled out of bed, still wearing the torn dress from yesterday because she had nothing else, and rushed downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but through the window she could see Boone and the boys already working in the barn. Morning light streamed through dirty glass, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like accusations. She'd overslept. First day here, and she'd already failed the one job she had. Clara found the stove cold, the coffee tin sitting unopened on the counter. Her hands shook as she worked the pump, filling the kettle. She had the fire going and biscuits in the oven before she heard footsteps on the stairs. Rosie appeared in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You're still here." The words hit harder than they should have. "Of course I'm still here." "Papa said you might leave in the night. People do that sometimes." Clara knelt down so she was eye level with the little girl. "I'm not going anywhere today, sweetheart, I promise you that much." Rosie studied her face with those two blue eyes, looking for lies. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she climbed into Clara's lap without warning, her small body warm and trusting in a way that made Clara's throat tight. "I'm hungry," Rosie announced. "Biscuits are almost ready. You want honey or jam?" "Both," Clara almost smiled. "Both it is." By the time Boone and the boys came in from morning chores, Clara had breakfast laid out. Biscuits, fried eggs, bacon she'd found hanging in the cold room, coffee so strong it could strip paint. The men stopped in the doorway, and Clara saw the surprise on their faces before they could hide it. "Didn't know if you'd be up," Boone said carefully. "I overslept. Won't happen again." Wasn't a criticism. He hung his hat on the hook by the door, and the boys followed suit, moving with synchronized precision. "Just meant you had a rough day yesterday. Nobody would have blamed you for sleeping in." Wyatt slid into his chair without looking at Clara. Ethan gave her a small smile before ducking his head. They ate in silence, the scrape of forks and knives filling the space where conversation should have been. Clara watched them, trying to read the dynamics. Wyatt was angry. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he gripped his fork too tight. Ethan was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, watchful, waiting. And Rosie chattered through mouthfuls of biscuit, completely oblivious to the tension or choosing to ignore it. "These are good," Boone said finally. "Better than anything I've managed." "Bar was pretty low then," Clara said before she could stop herself. Ethan snorted into his coffee. Even Wyatt's mouth twitched, though he fought it hard. Boone looked at her with something that might have been amusement. Fair point. After breakfast, the men disappeared back outside. Clara cleared the table and started on the dishes, but Rosie stayed close, hovering like a shadow. "Want to help me?" Clara asked. Rosie's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. You can dry while I wash." They worked together in comfortable quiet, Rosie humming some tuneless song while she dried plates with more enthusiasm than skill. Clara found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. Wash, rinse, hand over, wait for the enthusiastic drying, repeat. "Miss Clara?" "You can just call me Clara, sweetheart." "Mama used to let me help with dishes." Clara's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Did she?" "Yeah, she said little hands could do big work if they tried hard enough." Rosie set a plate on the counter with exaggerated care. "Do you think she was right?" "I think your mama was very smart." "Papa doesn't talk about her anymore. Wyatt says it makes him too sad." Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she just kept washing dishes. Sometimes silence was kinder than empty words. When the kitchen was clean, Clara did a proper inventory of the house. What she found made her chest hurt. This place had been beautiful once. You could see it in the details. Hand-carved molding around the doorways, a fireplace built from river stones, windows positioned to catch morning light. Someone had loved this house enough to build it with care. But grief had moved in after love moved out, and grief was a terrible housekeeper. Dust covered every surface. Curtains hung crooked or not at all. The parlor furniture sat under sheets like ghosts. Upstairs, the boys' room was chaos. Clothes everywhere, beds unmade, a general sense of nobody giving a damn about order. Rosie's room was neater, but sad, like the little girl had tried to maintain something her brothers had given up on. And then there was the closed door at the end of the hall. Clara stood in front of it for a full minute before turning the handle. The room was exactly as it had been left 2 years ago. A woman's room, frozen in time. Dresses still hanging in the wardrobe, a hairbrush on the vanity with strands of auburn hair still tangled in the bristles. The bed was made with military precision, like someone had smoothed the covers one last time before walking away forever. On the nightstand sat a framed photograph, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding a baby that must have been Rosie. She looked happy in a way that made Clara feel like an intruder. "That's my mama." Clara spun around. Wyatt stood in the doorway, his face hard and closed. "I'm sorry," Clara said quickly. I didn't mean to." "Yeah, you did. You meant to snoop." He crossed his arms, looking older than 12. "Papa hasn't been in here since she died. Nobody has. I was just taking inventory of the house. I didn't know this room was off limits." "It's off limits." Wyatt's voice cracked slightly. "You don't get to come in here and touch her things and pretend like you can just replace her." "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "Then what are you doing here?" Clara met his eyes, so much like his father's, full of the same grief and rage. "Trying to survive, same as you. We were surviving fine before you showed up." "Were you?" Clara gestured to the house around them. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've all been drowning for 2 years and nobody had the strength to ask for help." Wyatt's jaw clenched. For a second, Clara thought he might hit her, and she wouldn't have blamed him. Instead, he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Clara looked back at the photograph one more time, then quietly closed the door. She spent the rest of the morning cleaning. Not the bedroom. She wouldn't touch that again. But everywhere else. She swept floors and washed windows and beat dust out of curtains until her arms ached. She found a ladder in the barn and climbed up to take down curtains that hadn't been washed in years, nearly falling twice because her balance was still off from yesterday's ordeal. Around noon, she made sandwiches and took them out to the barn where Boone was working on a broken wagon wheel. He looked up when her shadow fell across him, surprise flickering across his face. "Thought you might be hungry," Clara said. Boone wiped his hands on his pants and took the plate. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but you're paying me to keep this place running, and that includes making sure you eat. I'm not paying you. Room and board, then. Same difference. Clara sat on an overturned bucket, watching him eat. Wyatt hates me. Boone didn't deny it. He hates most things right now. He thinks I'm trying to replace his mother. Are you? The bluntness of the question caught Clara off guard. No, I wouldn't even know how. Boone nodded slowly, chewing. His mother was the kindest person I ever met. Patient, gentle. She could calm a spooked horse just by talking to it. He stared at the half-eaten sandwich. I'm none of those things. Never have been. She balanced me out, made me better. And when she died, I didn't know how to be a father without her showing me how. You're doing fine. I'm keeping them alive. That's not the same as doing fine. He set the plate aside. Wyatt's angry because he thinks if he's angry enough, he won't have to feel sad. Ethan's quiet because he doesn't trust his voice not to break. And Rosie's too young to remember her mother clearly, which is maybe the worst thing of all. Clara didn't know what to say to that kind of pain, so she said nothing. I found your wife's garden, she said after a while, behind the house. It's completely overgrown. Boone flinched like she'd slapped him. Yeah. Would it upset you if I tried to fix it? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. She loved that garden more than anything except the kids. Spent hours out there talking to the plants like they were people. His voice went rough. I haven't been able to look at it since she died. I could leave it alone. No. Boone stood abruptly, brushing dust off his pants. No, she'd hate seeing it like that. She'd want someone to care for it. Just don't expect me to help. Clara nodded and stood to leave, but Boone's voice stopped her. Clara? She turned back. Thank you for the food, for cleaning, for being here. The words were awkward, like he'd forgotten how to express gratitude. Clara understood that feeling. You saved my life yesterday, she said quietly. Least I can do is make you a sandwich. That afternoon, while the children were occupied and Boone was working in the far pasture, Clara attacked the garden. It was worse than she'd thought. Weeds had taken over everything, choking out whatever had once grown there. She found old markers with faded writing, tomatoes, beans, squash, herbs she couldn't identify. She worked until her back screamed and her hands bled, pulling weeds and clearing dead plants. It was brutal work, and she had to stop multiple times to catch her breath. But there was something satisfying about seeing order emerge from chaos. She was elbow-deep in dirt when Ethan appeared beside her. What you doing? Clara wiped sweat from her forehead. Trying to save this garden. Not sure it's salvageable. Ethan crouched down, studying the mess. Mama used to grow strawberries over there. Best strawberries I ever tasted. Yeah? Yeah, she'd make strawberry jam every summer. We'd eat it on biscuits all winter. His voice went soft. I miss that. Clara's chest tightened. Maybe we can grow strawberries again. If I don't kill everything first. I could help if you want. I'd like that. They worked together in comfortable silence. Ethan showing her where things used to grow, Clara trying to salvage what she could. The boy didn't talk much, but his presence was companionable, and Clara found herself grateful for it. Miss Clara? Are you going to leave like everyone says? Clara sat back on her heels. What does everyone say? Town folks? They came by yesterday while you were sleeping. Told Papa you'd run off first chance you got. Said girls like you don't stay in places like this. Anger flared in Clara's chest. They came here to say that. Not to the house. Papa met them at the gate. Told them to get off his land. Ethan pulled a weed with vicious satisfaction. But I heard them. They said mean things about you. People in that town have been saying mean things about me my whole life. Doesn't make them true. So you're not leaving? Clara looked at the boy, really looked at him. 8 years old and already carrying the weight of abandonment like it was his job. I'm not leaving today, she said carefully, and I'm not leaving tomorrow. Past that, I can't make promises. But I can promise you this. If I do leave, it won't be because of what some small-minded people from town said about me. Ethan considered this, then nodded. That's fair. Dinner that night was louder. Rosie chattered about everything and nothing, filling the silence with stories that went nowhere. Clara had made chicken stew, and Ethan ate 3 bowls, which she counted as a victory. Even Wyatt cleaned his plate, though he still wouldn't meet her eyes. After dinner, Clara found Boone on the porch again, same spot as the night before, smoking and staring at the mountains. People from town came by, she said without preamble. I know, sent them packing. What did they want? Boone took a long drag on his cigarette. To warn me about you. Said I was a fool for bringing home a girl from the auction block. Said you'd steal from me and run off in the night. He exhaled smoke. Martha Green said you'd probably seduce me and trap me into marriage to get your hands on the ranch. Clara's face went hot. That's ridiculous. I know. Boone flicked ash into the darkness. But that's Red Hollow for you. They'd rather tear people down than mind their own business. I'm sorry. I'm bringing trouble to your door. You're not bringing anything except clean floors and decent food. The trouble's been here all along. I've just been too tired to care. Clara leaned against the railing, feeling the day settle into her bones. They're going to keep talking. About me. About you. About this whole situation. Let them talk. It could hurt your reputation. Hurt the children. Boone looked at her then, and there was something fierce in his eyes. My reputation survived my wife dying in childbirth while I was 20 miles away fixing a fence. It survived 2 years of me being a ghost in my own house. It'll survive me giving a home to a girl who needed one. I don't want to be your charity case. Then don't be. Earn your keep. Make this place a home again. And stop apologizing for existing. The words hit Clara like a slap and a caress at the same time. She opened her mouth to respond, but Rosie's voice called from inside. Papa, Clara, come see! They found all 3 children in the parlor. Rosie had dragged out a wooden crate full of old sheet music and was trying to open the piano that sat against the far wall, untouched and gathering dust. Can we play it? Rosie asked, her small hands already on the keys. Boone's face went carefully blank. That was your mother's piano. I know, but she's not here to play it anymore, and it's just sitting here being sad. Rosie looked up at her father with heartbreaking logic. Mama wouldn't want it to be sad, would she? Clara watched Boone struggle with this, saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he knelt down beside his daughter. No, baby. Your mama wouldn't want anything to be sad. So can we play it? I don't know how. Clara does. Rosie grabbed Clara's hand. Don't you? Please say you do. Clara hesitated. She had learned piano as a child, before her mother left, before everything fell apart. She hadn't touched one in 15 years. I'm very rusty, she warned. Don't care, please. Clara sat on the bench and lifted the fallboard. The keys were yellowed with age and several were stuck. She pressed middle C experimentally. The note came out slightly flat but recognizable. She started with something simple, a folk tune her mother had taught her. Her fingers stumbled at first, muscle memory fighting against years of neglect. But slowly, haltingly, the melody emerged. Rosie clapped her hands with delight. Even Ethan smiled. Wyatt stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, but he didn't leave. And Boone sat in his chair with his eyes closed, and Clara couldn't tell if he was in pain or finding peace. She played 3 more songs, each one coming easier than the last, before her fingers cramped and she had to stop. More, Rosie demanded. Tomorrow, Clara promised. My hands need a rest. After the children went to bed, Clara found Boone still in the parlor, staring at the piano like it might disappear. I'm sorry, she said. I should have asked before I... Oh, shut. She played every night, Boone interrupted, after the kids were asleep. She'd sit there and play for hours, and I'd sit here and listen. It was our time, the only time the house was quiet enough to hear ourselves think. He rubbed his face. I haven't heard music in this house since the day she died. I won't play again if it hurts too much. It does hurt. He looked at her, and his eyes were raw, but it also felt like she was here for a minute, like the house remembered what it used to be. He stood, moving toward the stairs. Play whenever you want. The piano shouldn't be silent just because she is. Clara sat alone in the parlor after he left, running her fingers over the keys without pressing down. This house was full of ghosts, and she was living among them, trying to find her place in a family that was still mourning the person she could never replace. The days blurred together after that. Clara fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, make breakfast, clean while the men worked, prepare lunch, tackle a new project, make dinner, clean again, collapse into bed exhausted. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done at the saloon, but it was also strangely satisfying. She fixed torn curtains, organized the pantry, cleaned every window until they sparkled, found mouse droppings in the cellar, and spent a full day setting traps and sealing holes. Her hands were constantly scraped and raw, her back ached, and she fell into bed each night too tired to dream. But the house was coming back to life, slowly, grudgingly, like something that had forgotten how to be beautiful and needed reminding. 2 weeks in, Clara made her first trip back to Red Hollow for supplies. Boone offered to come with her, but she refused. She couldn't hide forever. The general store went silent when she walked in. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Clara lifted her chin and walked to the counter like she owned the place. "I need flour, sugar, coffee, and salt," she told the clerk. "Also thread, 2 dozen eggs, and whatever vegetables you've got that aren't rotting." The clerk, a weaselly man named Dennis who'd laughed the loudest when she was tied to that fence, stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You got money to pay for all that?" Clara pulled out the coins Boone had given her and set them on the counter with deliberate precision. "I've got money. You've got supplies. This is how commerce works, Dennis. Try to keep up." Someone in the back of the store snorted with laughter. Dennis's face went red. He gathered her supplies with jerky, angry movements, slamming items on the counter hard enough to rattle jars. Clara counted her change carefully, making him wait, then loaded everything into her basket with the same measured calm. "Clara Whitmore," Martha Green's voice cut across the store. "Or should I say Clara Callahan, since that's what you're angling for?" Clara turned slowly. The store was packed now, people drawn by the promise of drama like flies to honey. "I'm not angling for anything," Clara said evenly. "I work for Mr. Callahan, that's all." "Work?" Martha's laugh was cruel. "Is that what they're calling it now?" "I cook his meals, clean his house, and help with his children." "What exactly do you think I'm doing?" "I think you saw an opportunity and took it. Rich widower, no wife, lonely, must have seemed like winning the lottery." Clara felt rage building in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know girls like you. I know how they operate." Martha stepped closer, and Clara could smell the malice coming off her in waves. "You think you're so clever, but everyone in this town knows what you are. And when Boone Callahan figures it out too, you'll be back on that fence where you belong." The store went deadly quiet. Clara could feel every eye on her, waiting to see if she'd break, waiting for tears or anger or some sign of weakness they could gossip about for weeks. Instead, she smiled. "You know what, Martha? You're right. I did see an opportunity." She picked up her basket. "I saw an opportunity to survive, to have a roof over my head and food in my stomach and maybe, just maybe, a chance at something better than dying in a whorehouse in Carson City." She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "But here's the thing you don't understand. I'm not trying to trap Boone Callahan. I'm trying to be useful enough that he doesn't throw me out. There's a difference." She walked out before anyone could respond, her head high, her hands shaking. She made it halfway down the street before she had to stop, pressing her back against the side of a building, breathing hard. The basket trembled in her grip. She'd held it together in there, but it cost her. Every word had been a fight against the urge to scream or cry or just crumble into nothing. That was impressive. Clara's head snapped up. A woman stood a few feet away, older, maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes. Clara didn't recognize her. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," the woman said. "I live about 10 miles west of Boone's place. Don't come to town much." "Then you missed the show last time I was here." "I heard about it." Sarah stepped closer, her voice gentle. "I also heard Boone paid your debt and took you home. Good for him. That man's been half dead for 2 years." Clara didn't know how to respond to that. "I knew his wife," Sarah continued. "Anne. She was a lovely woman, patient and kind and everything Boone wasn't. When she died, it broke something in him." She pulled a small package from her bag. "I brought you something, seeds for the garden." Clara took the package, stunned. "Why?" "Because Anne would have wanted someone to care for that garden. And because I have a feeling you're exactly what that family needs, even if they don't know it yet." She walked away before Clara could thank her, disappearing into the crowd. Clara stood there for a long moment, holding the seeds like they were precious, before heading back to where she'd left the horse tied. When she got back to the ranch, Boone was waiting on the porch. "How'd it go?" he asked. Clara climbed down from the horse, every muscle protesting. "About as well as expected. Martha Green called me a whore in front of half the town." Boone's jaw tightened. "What did you say?" "That I was trying to survive, not trap you into marriage." Clara hauled the supply basket off the horse. "Then I walked out with my head up and only cried a little bit on the way home." She expected anger or pity, or maybe dismissal. Instead, Boone laughed, short and surprised, but real. "You're tougher than you look," he said. "I've had a lot of practice." He took the basket from her without asking, and they walked to the house together. Inside, Clara could hear Rosie singing and the boys arguing about something trivial. Normal sounds, family sounds. "A woman named Sarah Mitchell gave me seeds," Clara said, "for the garden. Said your wife would have wanted someone to care for it." Boone stopped walking. Sarah knew Anne well. They were close. "She seemed nice." "She is." He set the basket on the kitchen table. "If she gave you seeds, it means she approves of you being here. That's not nothing in these parts." Clara started unpacking supplies, her movements automatic. "Does it matter if people approve?" "To me, no. But it might make your life easier if you have at least one ally in the valley." "I don't need allies. I just need to keep my head down and do my job." Boone caught her wrist gently, stopping her frantic unpacking. "Clara, you don't have to prove anything. You're allowed to just exist here." She looked up at him, at the quiet certainty in his face, and felt something crack in her chest. "I don't know how to do that. I've spent my whole life proving I deserve to take up space." "Then maybe it's time you learn different." He released her wrist and left her alone in the kitchen, and Clara stood there surrounded by flour and sugar and coffee, crying quietly into her hands where nobody could see. That night, after dinner, she planted Sarah's seeds in the garden by lamplight. The children helped, even Wyatt, though he pretended he was just bored and had nothing better to do. They worked in the dark, hands deep in soil, planting hope in careful rows. And when Clara finally crawled into bed that night, exhausted and filthy and more tired than she'd ever been, she realized something had changed. This place was starting to feel less like a refuge and more like something dangerous. It was starting to feel like home. And that terrified her more than anything Red Hollow could throw at her. The rider came 3 weeks later, just as the first tomatoes were starting to ripen in the garden. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw him, a lone figure on horseback, cresting the ridge that led to the ranch. Something about the way he sat his horse made her stomach twist. This wasn't a neighbor dropping by. This was something else. She dropped the wet sheet back in the basket and walked quickly toward the barn where Boone was shoeing one of the workhorses. "Someone's coming," she said. Boone looked up, read something in her face, and immediately straightened. He wiped his hands on his pants and moved to the barn door, squinting at the approaching rider. His entire body went rigid. "Get the children inside," he said quietly. "What? Why?" "Now, Clara, get them inside and keep them there." The edge in his voice killed any argument. Clara ran to where Rosie was playing near the chicken coop and scooped her up despite the little girl's protests. She found the boys in the pasture and herded them toward the house with sharp commands that brooked no discussion. "What's happening?" Wyatt demanded. "I don't know. Your father said to get inside and stay there." Through the window, Clara watched Boone walk out to meet the rider, his rifle held loose in one hand but ready. The distance was too far to hear their conversation, but she could read the tension in both men's postures. The stranger dismounted. He was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothes that had seen better days. Even from here, Clara could see the gun belt slung low on his hips. The easy way he moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently. "Who is that?" Ethan whispered, pressing against Clara's side. "I don't know, baby." But she was starting to get a sick feeling she did know, or at least knew what he represented. The conversation outside grew heated. Boone's voice rose enough that Clara caught fragments through the closed window. Not her problem. And paid in full. The stranger laughed at something, the sound carrying across the yard like broken glass. Then the stranger pointed directly at the house, and Clara's blood went cold. Boone stepped between the gesture and the house, his rifle no longer loose in his hand. The stranger said something else, tipped his hat in a mocking salute, and mounted his horse. But before he rode off, He looked straight at the window where Clara stood, and even at this distance she could see his smile. It was the smile of a man who'd gotten exactly what he came for. Boone watched him ride away until he disappeared over the ridge, then stood there for another full minute before turning back to the house. When he came through the door, his face was carved from granite. "Kids, go to your rooms." "But Papa," Rosie started. "Now." The children scattered like birds. Clara heard their footsteps on the stairs, the soft click of doors closing. She stayed in the kitchen, hands gripping the edge of the table. "Who was that?" she asked. Boone set his rifle against the wall and poured himself a glass of whiskey from the bottle he kept above the stove, drained it in one swallow, poured another. "His name's Jace Harlan. He's an outlaw. Runs with a gang that operates between here and Carson City." Boone's voice was flat, deliberately empty of emotion. "He says your father owed him money too." Clara's knees went weak. She sat down hard in the nearest chair. "How much?" $150. Poker debt from 2 years ago. 2 years? My father's been dead for over a month. Why show up now? Because Pike made noise about the auction. Word spreads. Boone drank the second whiskey. Harlan heard you were here, figured he'd collect. I don't have $150. I know. Did you pay him? Boone's laugh was bitter. I offered. He's not interested in money. The room went very cold. Clara's voice came out small. What does he want? He wants you. The words hung in the air like poison. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. What did you tell him? I told him to get the hell off my property, and if he came back, I'd shoot him. Boone set the glass down carefully, like he was afraid if he moved too fast, he'd break something. He laughed, said he'd give me 3 days to think it over. Said your father promised you as collateral if he couldn't pay, and in his world, that debt transfers. That's not legal. Harlan doesn't care about legal. He cares about what he can take. Clara's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. She'd finally found something stable, something safe, and now her father's ghost was reaching up from the grave to drag her back down. I'll leave, she said. Tonight. I'll go somewhere he can't find me. He'll find you. Men like Harlan don't give up. Boone moved to the window, staring out at the mountains. And even if you ran, he'd probably come back here looking. Maybe hurt the kids to make a point. The thought of Rosie or Ethan or even angry Wyatt being hurt because of her made Clara want to vomit. So what do we do? Boone was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. We prepare. We have 3 days. I'll send word to Sarah Mitchell and the other ranchers in the valley. Maybe we can get enough men together to what? Start a war over me? Clara stood, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm not worth that. I'm not worth anyone dying. That's not your call to make. The hell it isn't. This is my problem, my father's debt. Your father's been dead for over a month. This stopped being about him the moment Harlan decided he wanted you. Boone turned to face her, and his eyes were full of something Clara couldn't name. And it became my problem the moment I brought you to this ranch and told you you'd be safe here. You can't protect me from everything. Watch me. The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her, because it meant Boone was willing to fight, and fighting meant someone could die. And Clara had already cost too many people too much. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hall and knew Boone was awake too, probably checking windows and doors for the 100th time. Around 2 a.m, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Found Boone sitting in the dark parlor, rifle across his knees. You should rest, she said quietly. So should you. Clara sat in the chair across from him. Tell me about him. Harlan. Why? Because if I'm going to be terrified, I'd rather know exactly what I'm terrified of. Boone sighed. He's been operating in this territory for 5 years. Started small, robbery, cattle, rustling. Graduated to worse. He's got maybe 8 men riding with him, all of them mean as snakes. He paused. Last year they hit a ranch about 40 miles south of here. Family refused to pay protection money. Harlan burned their barn with their horses inside and shot the rancher's oldest son in the leg. Kid still walks with a limp. Clara's stomach turned. Why haven't the law dealt with him? Law out here is spread thin. By the time a marshal arrives, Harlan's gone. and most people are too scared to testify even if they catch him. So he just does whatever he wants. Pretty much. They sat in silence for a while, the darkness pressing close around them. I could give myself up, Clara said finally. Go with him. At least then, no. Boone. I said no. His voice was iron. You're not going anywhere with that man. I don't care if he brings his whole gang. I don't care if I have to fight them all myself. You're not leaving this ranch unless you choose to. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. Why? Why do you care this much? Boone was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was rough with something that sounded like pain. Because, for the first time in 2 years, this house doesn't feel like a tomb. Because my daughter smiles again. Because Ethan talks at dinner, and Wyatt's anger is starting to crack around the edges. Because you make coffee every morning without being asked, and you fix Dan's garden, and you play that damn piano in the evenings like you belong here. He looked at her through the darkness. Because I've been half dead since my wife died, and you walked into my life and reminded me what it feels like to be alive. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Clara didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to tell him that she felt it too, this dangerous thing growing between them, this connection that went beyond employer and employee, beyond savior and saved. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. What if he comes back and then we fight together? The next 2 days were a strange kind of torture. Boone sent messages to every ranch within 20 miles, calling in favors and asking for help. Sarah Mitchell's husband arrived with 2 of his ranch hands. 3 other men from neighboring properties showed up armed and ready. Even old Jacob Morrison, who had to be 70 if he was a day, rode in with his hunting rifle and a grim expression. They fortified the ranch as best they could, boiled water, and filled barrels in case of fire. Moved the horses to the far pasture where they'd be safer. Boone taught Clara how to load and fire a rifle, his hands steady on hers as he showed her the mechanics of it. Aim for center mass, he said. Don't try to be fancy, just point and shoot. Clara's hands shook on the weapon. I've never shot anyone. Hopefully, you won't have to. But if it comes down to you or him, I want you to pull that trigger without hesitation. You understand? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The children knew something was wrong, but didn't understand what. Rosie kept asking why all the men were there. Wyatt watched everything with suspicious eyes, smart enough to read the tension even if he didn't know the cause. Ethan stayed close to Clara, his small hand finding hers whenever she was near. On the 3rd day, nothing happened. The sun rose and set without incident. The men stayed alert, taking shifts watching the approach roads, but Harlan didn't come. Maybe he changed his mind, Clara said that evening. Boone shook his head. Men like Harlan don't change their minds. He's playing with us, making us sweat. He was right. Harlan came on the 4th day, just before sunset, when the light was failing and shadows were long across the valley. Clara was in the barn checking on the horses when she smelled smoke. Not wood smoke from a chimney. This was different, sharper, more urgent. She ran to the barn door and saw flames licking up the side of the hayloft, spreading fast. Fire! She screamed. The barn's on fire! Men came running from all directions. Boone sprinted from the house, the boys behind him. Everyone grabbed buckets and started a water line from the well, but the fire was spreading faster than they could fight it. The horses were screaming inside their stalls, panicked by the smoke and flames. We have to get them out, Clara yelled. It's too dangerous. Boone grabbed her arm. The roof's going to collapse. But Clara had already pulled free and was running into the barn. The heat hit her like a physical force, and smoke burned her lungs, but she could hear the horses screaming and she couldn't leave them to die. She reached the first stall and threw the latch open. The mare inside bolted past her toward the open door. Clara moved to the second stall, then the third, coughing so hard she could barely breathe. Above her, burning timbers creaked ominously. She got 4 horses out before a beam crashed down behind her, blocking her path to the door. Flames surrounded her on 3 sides now, and the heat was unbearable. Through the smoke, she saw Boone fighting his way toward her, his shirt pressed over his mouth. "Give me your hand!" he shouted. Clara reached for him just as another beam fell, this one between them, sending up a shower of sparks. The smoke was so thick now she couldn't see anything. Her lungs felt like they were filled with glass. Then Boone was there, somehow having forced his way through the flames. He grabbed her around the waist and half carried, half dragged her toward where he'd come from. Clara felt heat searing her arm, smelled her own hair singeing, and then they were outside, both of them collapsing on the ground while the barn burned behind them. Someone threw a blanket over Clara, beating out the embers that had caught on her dress. She sucked in clean air, coughing violently, tears streaming from her smoke-burned eyes. "The horses?" she choked out. "You got them all," Sarah Mitchell said, kneeling beside her. "Every last one. You crazy, brave girl." But there was no time to celebrate. Through her watering eyes, Clara saw riders approaching, 8 of them, moving out of the tree line in a loose formation. Harlan had come, and he'd brought help. The men around the ranch immediately grabbed their weapons. Boone hauled Clara to her feet, checking her over quickly for serious burns. "Get to the house," he ordered. "Now! Boone! Go!" Clara ran, her legs shaking, her lungs burning. She burst through the front door and found Rosie and Ethan huddled on the stairs, eyes wide with terror. "Upstairs," she gasped. "Both of you. Get in the bathtub and don't come out until someone tells you it's safe." "Where's Papa?" Rosie's voice was small and scared. "He's outside. He'll be fine. Go." Through the window, Clara saw the riders spread out, forming a semicircle around the yard. Harlan sat in the center, relaxed in his saddle like he was out for a Sunday ride. "Callahan," his voice carried across the distance. "We need to talk." Boone stood in front of the house, rifle ready. The other men fanned out behind him. "You burned my barn. There's nothing to talk about." "That was just to get your attention. I want the girl. You give her to me. We ride away peaceful. No more trouble." "She's not yours to take." Harlan laughed. "See, that's where you're wrong. Her daddy gave her to me as collateral. I got witnesses who'll swear to it. Her father's dead. The debt died with him. Not how I see it." Harlan shifted in his saddle, and Clara saw his hand move toward his gun. "I'm trying to be reasonable here, Callahan. I know you paid off Pike's debt. Fine. But this debt's different. This one's personal." Clara couldn't hear what Boone said next, but she saw him shake his head. Harlan's smile disappeared. "You got 3 seconds to send her out, or we start shooting. And I promise you, Callahan, you don't have enough men to stop all of us." Time seemed to slow down. Clara watched Boone's finger move to his trigger, saw the other ranchers do the same, saw Harlan's men draw their weapons. Then Wyatt stepped out onto the porch. Clara's heart stopped. The boy held his father's pistol in both hands, and it was pointed directly at Harlan. "You leave our family alone," Wyatt said, his voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "Wyatt, get back inside," Boone roared, but the damage was done. Harlan's eyes locked onto the boy, and his smile returned, cold and calculating. "That your son?" he called. "Brave kid. Be a shame if something happened to him." Harlan's hand moved to his gun, and time stopped being slow and became impossibly fast. Clara saw what was about to happen a split second before it did, saw Harlan drawing, saw him aiming not at Boone, but at Wyatt frozen on the porch. She didn't think. She just moved. Clara burst through the door and threw herself in front of Wyatt just as the gunshot cracked across the valley. The bullet hit her high on the left side, just below her shoulder. The impact spun her around and knocked her into Wyatt, sending them both crashing through the doorway. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Boone's rifle barked once, twice. The other ranchers opened fire. Harlan's men returned shots, and the air filled with the sound of bullets hitting wood, shattering glass, ricocheting off rocks. Clara lay on the floor of the entryway. Wyatt pinned beneath her, blood spreading hot and fast across her chest. The pain was incredible, white-hot and all-consuming. She couldn't breathe right, couldn't think past the agony. "Clara!" Wyatt was screaming, trying to push her off him, his hands coming away red with her blood. "Papa! Papa! She's shot!" The gunfight continued outside, but Clara's vision was going gray around the edges. She heard Rosie screaming from upstairs, heard men shouting, heard horses and more gunshots and chaos. Then Boone was there, dragging her away from the doorway, his face white as death. "Stay with me," he ordered, ripping her dress to see the wound. "Clara, stay with me." She tried to answer but couldn't make her mouth work. The room was spinning, and Boone's face kept fading in and out. "Sarah!" Boone bellowed. "I need help!" More hands on her, pressing something against the wound that made Clara scream. She tried to fight them off, but had no strength left. The bullet went through, Sarah's voice, tight with fear. We need to stop the bleeding. Outside, the gunfire was dying down. Clara heard horses galloping away, heard men shouting that they were running, heard victory and relief in their voices. But all she could feel was pain and the terrible cold spreading through her limbs. Don't you dare! Boone's voice cut through the fog. His face appeared above hers, and she'd never seen him look so terrified. Don't you dare leave us. You hear me, Clara? You don't get to save my son and then die. That's not how this works. She wanted to tell him she was sorry. Sorry for bringing this trouble. Sorry for getting shot. Sorry for probably dying on his floor and making his children watch. But the words wouldn't come, and the gray was turning black, and the last thing Clara saw before darkness took her was Boone's face and the tears running down his cheeks. Then nothing. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Pain first, sharp and constant. Then voices. Boone's rumbling bass. Sarah's softer tones. Rosie crying. Then touch. Someone holding her hand, squeezing gently. Clara forced her eyes open. The room swam into focus slowly. She was in a bed. Not her bed, she realized. Boone's bed. The one in the room she'd closed the door on weeks ago. Boone sat beside her, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were stained with blood. Her blood. His eyes were red-rimmed and haunted. Hey, he said softly when he saw her eyes open. Did we win? Clara's voice came out as a whisper. A smile flickered across his face, there and gone. Yeah, we won. Harlan and his men rode off. Lost one man, got shot in the arm, but everyone else is fine. Wyatt? Safe. Because of you. Boone's hand tightened on hers. You threw yourself in front of a bullet for my son. Couldn't let him get shot. You almost died. But I didn't. You've been unconscious for 3 days. You had a fever that nearly killed you. Sarah had to dig around in your shoulder to make sure there were no bullet fragments. His voice cracked. I thought I was going to lose you. Clara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her shoulder and she gasped. Easy, Boone said, helping her settle back against the pillows. You're not going anywhere for a while. The children are fine. Scared, but fine. Rosie's been sleeping on the floor next to this bed. Won't leave. Ethan keeps bringing you flowers from the garden. And Wyatt... Boone paused. Wyatt hasn't left the house since it happened. He blames himself. It's not his fault. Try telling him that. As if summoned, there was a soft knock on the door. Wyatt poked his head in, his face pale and drawn. Is she awake? Come in, Boone said. Wyatt entered slowly, like he was approaching something dangerous. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his hands clenched into fists. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice broke on the words. This is my fault. If I hadn't gone outside, if I hadn't tried to... You were protecting your family, Clara interrupted. That's not something to apologize for. But you got shot because of me. I got shot because Harlan's a bastard who aims at children. Clara held out her good hand. Come here. Wyatt hesitated, then moved closer. Clara took his hand in hers. I'm alive, she said firmly. I'm going to be fine. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. You understand? Tears spilled down Wyatt's cheeks. I thought you were going to die. I'm too stubborn to die. Your father can confirm that. Boone made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. She's not wrong. Wyatt stood there for a moment longer, then did something that surprised everyone. He leaned down and hugged Clara carefully, mindful of her injury, and whispered, Thank you. When he pulled back, some of the hardness had left his face. He looked younger, lighter. Over the next week, Clara slowly healed. Sarah came by every day to check the wound and change the dressing. The other ranchers stopped in to pay their respects, each one thanking her for her courage. Even Jacob Morrison brought her a jar of his wife's preserves and said any woman brave enough to run into a burning barn deserved the best jam in the valley. But it was the children who surprised her most. Rosie appointed herself Clara's personal nurse, bringing water and reading books out loud in her halting, proud voice. Ethan picked fresh vegetables from the garden and helped Sarah make soup, and Wyatt stayed close, like he was afraid if he looked away, Clara might disappear. Boone barely left her side. He slept in the chair next to the bed, moved his work to the room so he could be near, and refused to let her do anything herself. "I can walk to the washroom," Clara protested on the 5th day. "No, you can't." "Yes, I can. I'm not an invalid. You were shot. That makes you an invalid for at least another week." They argued about it, but Boone won by virtue of being bigger and stronger and willing to physically pick her up if she tried to stand on her own. On the 7th day, when Clara was finally allowed to sit up without help, Boone brought her something wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Clara unwrapped the cloth carefully and found papers inside. Legal documents. She scanned them, her heart starting to pound. This is a deed to the ranch. Co-ownership, Boone corrected. "As of 2 days ago, you own half of everything. The land, the livestock, the house, all of it." Clara stared at him in shock. "Why would you do this?" "Because you almost died protecting my son. Because you've made this place a home again. Because you deserve to have something that's yours that nobody can take away." He sat on the edge of the bed. "And because I want you to know you don't have to stay out of gratitude or obligation. You stay because you want to. Because this is your home too." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not enough." Boone took her hand. "Clara, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, stark and honest. Clara's breath caught. "Boone?" "Let me finish. I know the timing's terrible. I know you're hurt and recovering and probably don't want to hear this right now, but I almost lost you, and I realized I couldn't go another day without you knowing how I feel." He squeezed her hand gently. "You walked into my life when I was barely living, and you brought light back. You made my children smile again. You made me want to be more than just surviving." "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just telling you the truth." He stood up. "Rest. Heal. We'll figure out the rest later." But Clara caught his hand before he could leave. "Boone, wait." He turned back. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I've never had anything good last. I keep waiting for this to fall apart. For you to realize I'm not worth all this trouble." "You're worth everything." "How can you know that?" "Because I've been dead inside for 2 years, and you made me feel alive again. Because my children call you by name instead of hiding from strangers. Because you ran into a burning barn and took a bullet, and you're still lying there worried you're not good enough." He cupped her face gently. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Clara Whitmore. And I'm not letting you go." Clara felt something break open in her chest. All the fear and doubt and self-hatred she'd been carrying her whole life. And in its place, something new. Hope. Real, terrifying, beautiful hope. "I love you too," she whispered. Boone's eyes went wide. "Clara, I love you. I think I've loved you since you cut those ropes in Red Hollow and looked at me like I was a person instead of property." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm still scared, but I love you." Boone leaned down and kissed her then, gentle and careful because of her injury, but full of everything he couldn't put into words. When he pulled back, they were both crying. "Marry me," he said. Clara laughed through her tears. "I'm lying in bed recovering from a gunshot wound." "I don't care. Marry me, as soon as you can stand without falling over. Marry me and make this official. Make this family whole." "Yes," Clara heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." From the hallway came the sound of feet stampeding and children cheering. Apparently they'd been listening the whole time. Rosie burst through the door first, launching herself onto the bed with enough force to make Clara wince. "You're going to be our mama for real." Ethan and Wyatt crowded in after her, all of them talking at once, and Boone was laughing and trying to keep them from jostling Clara's injury, and the room was full of noise and joy and the messy, complicated beauty of a family being born. Clara lay there surrounded by chaos and realized she'd finally found what she'd been searching for her whole life. She'd found home. And she was never letting it go. Recovery was harder than getting shot. That's what Clara told Sarah Mitchell 3 weeks later when the older woman came to check on her progress. The wound itself was healing clean, but the weakness that followed drove Clara half mad. She couldn't lift anything heavier than a coffee cup, couldn't help with meals beyond sitting at the table and giving instructions, couldn't walk to the barn without Boone hovering like she might collapse. "You took a bullet through the shoulder," Sarah said, unwrapping the bandage to inspect the healing tissue. "You're lucky you can move your arm at all. Give it time." "I don't have time. There's work to do. The garden needs weeding. The house needs—" "The house is fine. The garden is fine. You need to heal." Sarah began applying fresh salve, and Clara hissed at the sting. "Besides, you've got 3 children and a grown man falling over themselves to take care of you. Let them." But letting people care for her felt wrong. Clara had spent her whole life being a burden, and now here she was, helpless again, taking up space in Boone's bed while he slept in a chair beside her like some kind of guard dog. "He looks terrible," Clara said quietly. Sarah glanced toward the door where Boone had disappeared moments before, probably to check on something that didn't need checking. "He hasn't slept properly since you were shot. Won't leave you alone for more than an hour at a time. That's not healthy. Neither is throwing yourself in front of bullets, but you did that anyway." Sarah secured the new bandage with practiced efficiency. "Let him fuss, Clara. He needs it. When Anne died, he didn't get to fight for her, couldn't save her. But he could save you, and he did. Let him have this." The words settled into Clara's chest, heavy and uncomfortable. She hadn't thought about it that way, hadn't considered that Boone's constant presence was less about doubting her strength and more about reassuring himself she was still breathing. That night, when he came to bed, still in the chair, still refusing to sleep beside her despite Clara's protests that she wasn't going to break, Clara reached out and took his hand. "Come here," she said. "You need space to heal. I need you to sleep in an actual bed before you destroy your back." She shifted over carefully, making room. "Please." Boone hesitated, then finally relented. He climbed in beside her, moving with exaggerated care, like she was made of glass. Clara settled against his shoulder, the good one, and felt him relax for the first time in weeks. "Better?" she whispered. "Yeah." His arm came around her waist, gentle but secure. "Yeah, this is better." They lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around them. Somewhere down the hall, one of the children turned over in sleep. Outside, wind moved through the pines. "Boone? Tell me about Anne." She felt him tense. "Why?" "Because the children talk about her sometimes, and I want to understand. I want to know who she was, not just that she existed." Clara turned her head slightly to look at him. "I'm not trying to compete with a memory. I just want to know." Boone was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old grief. "She was good. That's the first thing you need to know. She was genuinely good in a way most people aren't. Patient with the kids even when they were driving me crazy. Kind to strangers. She used to feed every drifter who came through, said nobody should go hungry if we had food to share." He paused. "She made me laugh. I didn't laugh much before I met her, and after she died, I forgot how." "Until recently," Clara said softly. "Until you." His arm tightened slightly. "She would have liked you, I think. Would have appreciated how you don't take any of my shit." Clara smiled in the darkness. "What was she bad at?" "What?" "Everyone's bad at something. What was she bad at?" Boone actually laughed, quiet and surprised. "Cooking. She tried, but everything came out either burnt or raw. I did most of the cooking, and she handled the garden and the kids." His voice went softer. "And singing. She loved to sing, but she couldn't hold a tune to save her life. Used to sing Rosie to sleep every night, completely off key, and Rosie would just smile up at her like it was the most beautiful sound in the world." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "She sounds wonderful." She was. And when she died giving birth to Rosie, I was 20 miles away fixing a fence that could have waited. Bitterness crept into his voice. By the time I got home, it was too late. Sarah did everything she could, but Anne had lost too much blood. I got to hold her hand for maybe 10 minutes before she was gone. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Boone shifted slightly, and Clara could feel the weight of 2 years of grief in the movement. "For a long time I blamed myself. Thought if I'd been here, maybe I could have done something, or maybe I just could have said goodbye properly." "What did you say? In those 10 minutes?" "That I loved her, that the baby was beautiful, that I'd take care of the children." His voice cracked. "She told me not to let the world make me cold. Then she died." They lay together in the darkness, and Clara felt the ghost of Anne Callahan settle over them like a blanket. Not threatening, not possessive, just present. "I'm not her," Clara said finally. "I can't be her. I know, and I'm not asking you to be. Boone pressed a kiss to her hair. I loved her with everything I had. And then she died, and I thought that was it. Thought I'd used up my chance at love. But then you showed up tied to a fence, too stubborn to cry, and something in me woke up. That's not romantic. It's honest. He tilted her face up to look at him. I'm not going to pretend Anne never existed. She's the mother of my children. She built this house with me. She's part of our story. But you're part of it now too. Different, but just as important. Clara kissed him then, slow and gentle, and felt something settle in her chest. She wasn't replacing anyone. She was becoming part of something that already existed, adding her thread to a tapestry that would always have Anne woven through it. Marry me soon, Boone whispered against her lips. I don't want to wait. I can barely walk without getting dizzy. Then we'll have a sitting wedding. I don't care. I just want you to be my wife. Clara pulled back enough to see his face in the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains. You're serious. Completely. Boone, people are going to talk. They already think I trapped you. If we get married this fast, let them talk. I'm done caring what Red Hollow thinks. His hand cupped her face. I've spent 2 years being half alive, and I'm tired of it. I want to move forward with you. What about the children? Shouldn't we ask them how they feel? We're listening at the door. Rosie's voice carried clearly from the hallway. And we want you to get married, Boone sighed. How long have you been out there? The whole time, Ethan admitted, not sounding remotely apologetic. All 3 of you? Yes, Rosie again, followed by giggles. Boone looked at Clara with an expression somewhere between exasperation and amusement. Well, there's your answer. Clara couldn't help laughing, which hurt her shoulder, but felt good anyway. Fine. Fine. We'll get married as soon as I can stand up without falling over. The children erupted in cheers, and within seconds they'd burst into the room, piling onto the bed with complete disregard for Clara's injury. Boone tried to restore order, but it was hopeless, and eventually he gave up and just let them celebrate. Clara sat in the middle of the chaos, children talking over each other about flowers and cake, and whether Wyatt would have to wear a suit, and felt something she'd never felt before. Belonging. Pure, uncomplicated belonging. 2 weeks later, Clara could walk from the house to the barn without needing to stop and rest. Sarah declared her healing well enough for light work, though she still couldn't lift anything heavy. The ranch hands had rebuilt the barn, smaller than before but functional, and life was slowly returning to normal. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Everything felt new. Boone started sleeping in the bed with her every night. Not for anything improper, just holding her, talking quietly until they both fell asleep. The children had taken to calling Clara Mama Clara, without anyone telling them to, and while it made her chest tight every time, she didn't correct them. One afternoon, while Rosie was helping Clara shell peas on the porch, the little girl asked the question Clara had been dreading. Did you know my first mama? Clara's hand stilled. No, sweetheart. She died before I came here. Papa says she was really nice. I think she must have been. She raised you and your brothers, didn't she? Rosie nodded seriously. I don't remember her much. Is that bad? Clara set down the peas and pulled Rosie into her lap, careful of her still healing shoulder. No, baby, you were very little when she died. It's not bad that you don't remember. Wyatt remembers. He tells me stories sometimes. That's good. You should listen to those stories. Rosie was quiet for a moment, then looked up at Clara with those 2 blue eyes. Are you going to be my mama now? The question hit Clara like a physical blow. I don't know, Rosie. That's up to you. I'm going to marry your papa, but that doesn't mean you have to call me mama if you don't want to. But I do want to. Rosie's voice was matter-of-fact. You make flapjacks, and you fix the garden, and you got shot protecting Wyatt. That's what mamas do. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. Is it okay with you that I'm marrying your papa? Yeah, he smiles now. He didn't used to smile. Out of the mouths of children came the simplest truths. Clara hugged Rosie close and let herself cry quietly into the little girl's hair. That evening, Boone found her in Anne's garden. Their garden now, she supposed. The tomatoes were coming in heavy, and the beans were climbing their poles with aggressive enthusiasm. Clara was carefully weeding around the strawberry plants Ethan had been so excited about. Thought you weren't supposed to be doing this yet, Boone said. Light work. Sarah approved. Clara sat back on her heels. Besides, I can't just sit around doing nothing. Boone crouched beside her, studying the garden with approval. It looks good. Anne would be happy. Rosie asked me today if I knew her mother. What'd you say? The truth. That I didn't. But that she must have been wonderful to raise such good children. Clara pulled another weed. She asked if I was going to be her mama now. Boone went still. What'd you tell her? That it was up to her. That I'd marry you, but she didn't have to call me anything she didn't want to. Clara glanced at him. She said she wants to. That mamas make flapjacks and fix gardens and take bullets for their brothers. Boone's laugh was wet with unshed tears. That sounds like Rosie logic. Is it okay that they're starting to call me that? Clara, you took a bullet for my son. You run into burning barns to save horses. You've made this house feel like a home again. He took her hand, dirt and all. You've earned the right to be called whatever they want to call you. That night, Clara played piano for the children before bed. Her shoulder ached, and she couldn't manage anything complicated, but simple folk songs worked fine. Rosie sat on the bench beside her, and the boys sprawled on the floor, and Boone watched from his chair with something soft in his eyes. After the children went to bed, Clara and Boone sat on the porch in the cooling evening air. I want to get married at the church, Clara said suddenly. In town. Boone looked at her sharply. You sure about that? People there haven't exactly been kind to you. I know. That's why I want to do it there. Clara stared out at the darkening mountains. I want everyone who tied me to that fence and laughed to see exactly how wrong they were about me. I want Martha Green and Dennis and Pike and every single person who said I'd run off or seduce you or ruin your life to watch me walk down that aisle and marry you in front of everyone. Boone was quiet for a moment, then smiled, sharp and fierce. You want to rub their faces in it. Is that terrible? No. It's perfect. He pulled her close, mindful of her shoulder. We'll have the biggest damn wedding Red Hollow's ever seen. Planning a wedding while recovering from a gunshot wound was not something Clara had ever imagined doing, but here she was. Sarah took charge of most of the details, bullying the church into agreeing to host and organizing food for after the ceremony. The other ranch wives pitched in, offering to make cakes and pies and enough food to feed half the valley. Clara's biggest problem was finding something to wear. She had exactly 2 dresses to her name, the torn one she'd arrived in, and a simple work dress Boone had bought her from the general store. Neither was appropriate for a wedding. Sarah solved this by arriving one afternoon with a large wrapped package. This was Anne's, she said, setting it on the kitchen table. Her wedding dress. I've been keeping it safe. Clara stared at the package like it might bite her. I can't wear that. Why not? Because it was hers. It wouldn't be right. Clara, Anne would have wanted someone to wear it. She spent months making it, and it's been sitting in my attic for 8 years gathering dust. Sarah began unwrapping the package. Besides, you're about the same size. Might need a few alterations, but nothing major. The dress that emerged was simple but beautiful, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery around the neckline and cuffs. Not fancy, but made with love and care. I can't, Clara whispered. You can, and you will. Sarah's voice was firm. Anne built a life here, and then she died, and that life fell apart. You put it back together. Wearing her dress isn't disrespectful. It's honoring what she started, and you continued. Clara touched the fabric with trembling fingers. What if people think... People will think whatever they want. They always do. Sarah pressed the dress into Clara's hands. You've earned the right to stop caring what they think. The dress fit perfectly with only minor alterations to the hem. Clara stood in front of the mirror in Sarah's house and barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who belonged somewhere, someone who mattered. You're beautiful, Sarah said, her eyes wet. Clara's own eyes burned. I look like a bride. You are a bride. In 3 days, you'll be Clara Callahan, co-owner of one of the best ranches in the valley and mother to 3 children who adore you. Mother? The word still felt foreign on Clara's tongue, but it was starting to fit. The night before the wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to Boone breathe beside her and tried to quiet the panic rising in her chest. You're thinking too loud, Boone mumbled without opening his eyes. Sorry. What's wrong? Clara was quiet for a moment. What if I'm terrible at this, at being a wife and a mother? What if I mess them up? You won't. You don't know that. Boone opened his eyes and turned to face her. Clara, you've been doing the job for 2 months already. The kids are happier than they've been in 2 years. The house is a home again. You're not going to suddenly become terrible at it just because we make it official. But what if nothing? He cupped her face gently. You're going to make mistakes. So am I. So will the kids. That's what families do. But we'll figure it out together. I've never had a family before. Not a real one. Neither have I. Not since Anne died. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. We're building something new here. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's family. It just has to be ours. Clara kissed him, pouring every ounce of fear and hope and love into it. When they finally broke apart, Boone rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he whispered, you're going to walk into that church and become my wife. And every single person in Red Hollow who ever made you feel small is going to watch it happen and know they were wrong about you. What if they don't come? What if we throw a wedding and nobody shows up? Boone's smile was dangerous. Then we'll have more cake for ourselves. But Clara needn't have worried. When they arrived at the church the next day, it was packed. The entire valley had turned out. Ranchers and their families, shopkeepers, even people Clara had never met. Some came out of curiosity, wanting to see if the rumored wedding would actually happen. Others came out of respect for Boone. And a few came because Sarah Mitchell had apparently spent the last week telling everyone in a 50-mile radius that if they didn't show up to support Clara, they'd answer to her. Clara waited in the back room with Sarah while the church filled. Through the door, she could hear voices and footsteps and the general chaos of a crowd gathering. You ready? Sarah asked, adjusting Clara's veil, a simple piece of lace that had also been Anne's. No, yes, I don't know. Clara's hands shook as she held the small bouquet of wildflowers Ethan had picked that morning. Is Boone out there? Front row, looking like he might murder anyone who speaks to him. The boys are with him. Rosie's your flower girl, remember? Right. Clara had almost forgotten. Rosie appeared in the doorway wearing a dress Sarah had made for her, holding a basket of flower petals and grinning like it was Christmas. You look pretty, Mama Clara, Rosie announced. Clara's heart squeezed. So do you, sweetheart. Can I go now? I want to throw the flowers. Sarah laughed. Yes, baby. Go throw your flowers. Rosie skipped out, and Clara could hear the collective awe from the congregation as the little girl began tossing petals with enthusiastic abandon. Then the piano started, someone Clara didn't know, playing a simple wedding march, and Sarah squeezed her hand. This is it. You ready to walk in there and show them all exactly who you are? Clara thought about the fence, about Pike's hand on her chin, about every person in Red Hollow who'd written her off as worthless, about the girl she'd been 2 months ago, dying in the sun with no hope of salvation, and she thought about who she was now, survivor, fighter, co-owner of a ranch, almost wife, almost mother. Yeah, she said. I'm ready. Sarah opened the door and Clara stepped into the sanctuary. Every head turned. The room went absolutely silent except for the piano. Clara lifted her chin and began walking down the aisle. She saw them all as she passed. Martha Green, her face twisted with something between shock and grudging respect. Dennis, the store clerk, looking away uncomfortably. The banker Pike, whose face had gone red with suppressed rage. All the people who'd laughed when she was tied up like an animal. All the ones who'd whispered she'd seduce Boone and steal his ranch. Let them look. Let them see exactly what their cruelty had created. But mostly, Clara saw Boone. He stood at the front of the church in his best suit, and he was staring at her like she'd hung every star in the sky. His eyes were wet, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and when she finally reached him, he whispered, You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Clara's own eyes filled with tears. You're not so bad yourself. The ceremony was simple. The minister spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. Clara and Boone repeated vows that felt both sacred and terrifying. When it came time for the ring, Wyatt stepped forward with it, a simple gold band that had been Boone's mother's. With this ring, Boone said, sliding it onto Clara's finger, I promise to protect you, honor you, and love you for as long as I'm breathing. Clara's turn. She didn't have a ring for Boone, they'd run out of time to find one, but she took his hand anyway. I don't have anything to give you except myself, she said, her voice shaking. But I promise to make this house a home, to love your children like they're mine, and to stand beside you through whatever comes, for as long as you'll have me." "That'll be forever then," Boone said quietly. The minister cleared his throat. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Boone cupped Clara's face in both hands and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and when they finally broke apart, both were crying. "Mrs. Callahan," Boone whispered against her lips. "Mr. Callahan," Clara whispered back. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and Clara caught glimpses of faces in the crowd. Some were genuinely happy. Others looked stunned. Pike looked like he'd swallowed something rotten. Clara didn't care about any of them. She just held tight to Boone's hand and kept walking toward their future. The reception was held in the church hall, and it was loud and chaotic and perfect. People ate and drank and danced. Children ran wild. The ranch hands told embarrassing stories about Boone that made Clara laugh until her sides hurt. But the best moment came when the children presented Clara with their gift. Wyatt brought it out, a wooden sign they'd carved themselves with help from one of the ranch hands. The letters were crooked and uneven but readable. "Home at last," it said. "We're going to hang it above the fireplace," Ethan explained, "so everyone knows you're home for real now." Clara burst into tears right there in front of everyone and pulled all three children into a careful hug. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "Don't cry, Mama," Rosie said, patting her face. "You'll mess up your pretty face." Clara laughed through her tears. "Too late for that, baby." As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Clara found herself on the church steps with Boone, watching people head home. The valley spread out before them, painted gold and purple in the dying light. "You did good today," Boone said. "We did good. I meant what I said in those vows, forever." Clara leaned against him, feeling his warmth, his solidity, his realness. "I know, so did I." They stood there until the last guest left, until the children got tired and piled into the wagon, until the church closed up and it was time to go home. Home. The word didn't scare her anymore. As they drove back to the ranch through the darkening valley, Clara thought about how far she'd come. From the fence to this moment. From worthless to wanted. From dying in the sun to building a life in the mountains. When they pulled up to the house, she saw it. The lights in the windows, the smoke from the chimney, the flowers in the garden, the rebuilt barn. All of it hers now. Really, truly hers. Boone helped her down from the wagon and pulled her close. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan." Clara kissed him, long and slow and full of promise. "It's good to be home, Mr. Callahan." And it was. It really, really was. The first snow came in late October, 6 months after the wedding. Clara woke to find the world transformed, everything white and silent, the mountains wearing their winter coat like they'd been waiting for it all year. She stood at the bedroom window wrapped in a quilt, watching fat flakes drift down through the early morning gray, and felt Boone's arms come around her from behind. "First snow always comes as a surprise," he murmured against her neck. "Even when you're expecting it." Clara leaned back into his warmth. "Is it going to be a hard winter?" "Probably. They usually are up here." He kissed her temple. "But we're ready. Barn stocked, woods cut, pantries full. We'll be fine." We. Clara still wasn't used to that word, even after 6 months of marriage. Still caught herself thinking in terms of I and me. Still had moments where she expected to wake up back in Red Hollow tied to that fence, the ranch, and Boone and the children, nothing but a fever dream. But then Rosie would come running in demanding flapjacks, or Ethan would show her something he'd found in the garden, or Wyatt would actually smile at her without the weight of grief behind it, and she'd remember this was real. This was her life now. "Mama Clara," Rosie's voice carried up the stairs. "It's snowing. Can we build a snowman?" Clara smiled. "Duty calls." "Let her wait 5 more minutes. I want you to myself a little longer." They stood at the window together, watching the snow fall, and Clara thought about how much had changed since spring. The garden had yielded more vegetables than they could eat, so she'd learned to can and preserve. The rebuilt barn stood strong against the wind. The children had grown. Rosie had lost 2 teeth, Ethan had shot up 3 inches, and Wyatt had started looking less like a boy and more like a young man. And Clara herself had changed too. Her hands were calloused now from real work. Her shoulder had healed with only a small scar. She'd put on weight, good weight, healthy weight, the kind that came from regular meals and not wondering where the next one would come from. She looked in the mirror sometimes and barely recognized the woman staring back. That woman looked strong, looked like she belonged somewhere. "I got a letter yesterday," Boone said quietly. "Didn't want to mention it until after the wedding excitement died down, but I guess now's as good a time as any." Clara's stomach tightened. "What kind of letter?" "From the marshal in Carson City. They caught Harlan." The name sent ice through Clara's veins. She turned in Boone's arms to face him. "What?" "He tried to rob a bank in Carson City with 2 of his men. Marshall was waiting. There was a shootout. Harlan took a bullet to the leg, and they arrested him and what's left of his gang." Boone's expression was carefully neutral. "He's going to hang." Clara should have felt relieved, should have felt safe. Instead, she just felt empty. "When?" "Next month. Marshall wanted to know if we wanted to come testify about the attack on the ranch, but I already wrote back and said no. We've got statements from everyone who was here. That's enough." "Good." Clara pressed her face against Boone's chest. "I don't ever want to see him again." "You won't have to. He's done. He can't hurt you anymore." They stood there in silence, and Clara tried to process what this meant. For months, she'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for Harlan to come back with more men, more guns, more violence. She'd had nightmares about it, waking up gasping, reaching for Boone in the dark to make sure he was still there, still breathing, still alive. Now Harlan was going to hang, and she was safe. Really, truly safe. So why did she feel like crying? "Hey," Boone tilted her face up. "Talk to me." "I don't know what I'm feeling. I should be happy he's caught, but I just feel tired. Like I've been bracing for impact for so long, I don't know how to relax." "That's normal. It takes time to believe the danger's really over." He kissed her forehead. "But it is over, Clara. You're safe. The kids are safe. We're all safe." Rosie's voice came again, more insistent this time. "Mama, the snow's getting deeper." Clara wiped her eyes and managed to smile. "Coming, baby." They went downstairs to find all 3 children pressed against the windows like prisoners watching freedom. The moment Clara appeared, they started begging to go outside, talking over each other in their excitement. "Breakfast first," Clara said firmly. "Then we'll see about snowmen." The groans were loud but good-natured. Clara made flapjacks. She'd gotten good at them over the months. While Boone built up the fire and the children set the table with chaotic enthusiasm. This was their routine now. Their normal. After breakfast, Clara bundled the children into coats and scarves and sent them outside while she and Boone tackled the dishes. Through the window, she watched Rosie immediately fall backward into the snow to make angels while the boys started gathering snow for what promised to be an ambitious snowman. "They're happy," Boone observed, following her gaze. "They are." Clara scrubbed at a stubborn bit of dried batter. "Sometimes I still can't believe I get to be part of this." "You're not part of it. You're the center of it." Boone took the plate from her hands and set it aside, then pulled her close. "This family was falling apart before you came. Now look at us." Clara kissed him, tasting coffee and contentment, and thought about how strange life was. 6 months ago, she'd been convinced she'd die tied to that fence. Now she was standing in a warm kitchen, kissing her husband while their children played in the snow outside. The world could change so fast. For better or worse, it could transform overnight. Later that morning, Sarah Mitchell arrived on horseback, her face pink from the cold. "Thought I'd check on you before the snow gets too deep," she said, accepting the coffee Clara offered. "Roads will be impassable by tomorrow if this keeps up." They sat at the kitchen table while the children's laughter drifted in from outside. Sarah studied Clara with the frank assessment of someone who'd known her through the worst and best moments of the past 6 months. "You look good," Sarah said finally. "Healthy. Happy." "I am happy." Clara wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup. "Is that allowed?" "Why wouldn't it be?" "Because happiness feels dangerous. Like if I admit I have it, something will come and take it away." Sarah's expression softened. "That's trauma talking, honey. You spent so long waiting for the next bad thing that you forgot good things can last too." "Harlan's going to hang," Clara said abruptly. "Boone got a letter yesterday." "I heard. News travels fast, even in winter." Sarah sipped her coffee. How do you feel about that? I don't know, relieved, guilty, both? Clara stared into her cup. He was a terrible person who tried to hurt my family, but I can't celebrate someone dying. Nobody's asking you to celebrate. You're allowed to feel complicated things about complicated situations. Sarah set down her cup. But you are allowed to feel safe now. That part's not complicated. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Sarah stayed for lunch, and by the time she left, the snow was coming down so thick you could barely see 20 feet. Boone helped her saddle up, and Clara watched from the porch as the older woman rode away, disappearing into the white curtain like a ghost. Storm's going to get worse, Boone said, climbing the porch steps. We'll be snowed in for a few days, at least. Clara found she didn't mind the thought. Snowed in meant the family would be together, close, safe within these walls while the world raged outside. It felt almost luxurious. That night, after the children were in bed, Clara and Boone sat by the fire while wind howled around the house. She was mending one of Ethan's shirts. The boy went through clothes like he was trying to set a record, and Boone was reading a month-old newspaper that had arrived before the snow started. Says here there's talk of running telegraph lines through the valley, Boone said. Connect us to Carson City and beyond. That'd be something. Actual news instead of month-old papers. Progress, I guess. Whether we want it or not. He folded the paper and set it aside. Clara? Are you happy here? Really happy? Not just safe, but actually content? Clara set down her mending and looked at him. Why are you asking? Because you came here out of necessity, not choice. And I know you've made the best of it, but I want to know if this is the life you'd choose if you could have anything. The question surprised her. Clara thought about it carefully, examining her feelings like precious stones. When I was a girl, she said slowly, before my mother left and my father started drinking, I used to imagine what my life would be like when I grew up. I pictured a house, a family, feeling like I mattered to someone. But I never really believed it would happen. It felt like a fairy tale, something for other people, but not for me. She picked up the shirt again, running her fingers over the tear she'd been mending. Then I grew up, and life got hard. And I stopped imagining altogether. I just focused on surviving one day at a time. When you pulled me off that fence, I wasn't hoping for happiness. I was just hoping not to die in a brothel in Carson City. Boone's jaw tightened at the reminder, but he stayed quiet. So to answer your question, yes, I'm happy. Happier than I ever imagined I could be. Not because this life is perfect or easy, but because it's real. Because I wake up every morning and I matter to people. The children need me. You want me. I have a place here that's actually mine. She met his eyes. This isn't the life I would have chosen, because I never would have had the courage to choose something this good. But it's the life I have, and I'm grateful for it every single day. Boone crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. I love you. You know that, right? I know. And not because you cook and clean and take care of the kids. I love you because you're brave and stubborn, and you refuse to let the world break you. I love you because you make me want to be better than I am. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You're already pretty good. I'm a work in progress. We both are. He kissed her knuckles. But we're doing it together. They sat together in the firelight while the storm raged outside, and Clara thought about the strange mathematics of love, how it multiplied instead of divided, how giving yourself away somehow made you more whole instead of less. The snow kept falling for 3 days straight. By the time it stopped, the ranch was buried under 2 feet of fresh powder, and the world had gone completely silent. Clara had never experienced quiet like this, the absolute absence of sound except for the crackle of the fire and the voices of her family. On the 4th day, the sun came out, and the children went wild. They built snow forts and had snowball fights, and came inside with red faces and wet clothes, tracking snow through the house that Clara had given up trying to prevent. They're going to get sick, she fretted to Boone. They're going to be fine. Kids are resilient. He was right, of course. All 3 children stayed healthy despite spending hours playing in freezing weather, while Clara and Boone took turns keeping the fire going and making sure everyone ate properly. It was during one of those long evenings, with everyone gathered in the parlor, that Wyatt asked the question Clara had been dreading. Miss Sarah said our first mama would have liked you, he said abruptly, looking up from the book he was reading. Is that true? The room went very quiet. Ethan and Rosie both looked at Clara with wide eyes, waiting for her answer. Boone's hand found hers and squeezed gently. Clara set down her own book and chose her words carefully. I never met your mother, so I can't say for sure, but from everything your papa and other people have told me, she sounds like she was kind and generous and loved her family more than anything. If that's true, then yes, I think she would have liked that someone was here taking care of you and making your papa smile again. Do you think about her? Wyatt's voice was challenging, like he was testing her somehow. Sometimes, Clara admitted, I sleep in her bed, cook in her kitchen, tend her garden. It's hard not to think about her. Does it bother you that she was here first? Wyatt, Boone started, but Clara squeezed his hand. It's okay. She looked at Wyatt steadily. No, it doesn't bother me. Your mother built a beautiful life here, and then she died, and that life fell apart. I didn't replace her. I couldn't even if I wanted to. But I'm trying to honor what she built by taking care of the people she loved. Does that make sense? Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. She used to read to us every night. She did different voices for all the characters. It was stupid, but it made us laugh. That doesn't sound stupid at all. Papa doesn't do the voices. He just reads the words. Clara glanced at Boone, who looked slightly defensive. I'm not good at voices. Want me to try? Clara offered. I don't know if I'll be any good, but I could try doing voices when I read to you. Something shifted in Wyatt's expression. Not quite acceptance, but maybe the beginning of it. Yeah, okay, you could try. That night, Clara read to the children before bed, attempting different voices for each character. She was terrible at it. Her attempts at a gruff giant sounded more like a frog with a cold, and her princess voice made all three children giggle. But they laughed, and that was what mattered. After they were asleep, Clara found Boone on the porch again, his usual evening spot. That was good, he said. What you did tonight. I probably sounded ridiculous. You sounded like someone who loves them. That's all they need. Clara leaned against the railing, looking out at the snow-covered ranch glittering under the moonlight. Wyatt's still struggling with all this, with me being here. He's struggling with growing up, with missing his mother, with wanting to move forward but feeling guilty about it. Boone pulled her against his side. He'll get there. They all will. Hell, I'm still getting there. Do you still miss her? Anne? Boone was quiet for a moment. Every day. But it's different now. The grief isn't as sharp. It doesn't consume everything anymore. He turned Clara to face him. You didn't erase her, Clara. You gave me a reason to keep living instead of just existing. Those are two very different things. Clara kissed him, and it tasted like healing and hope and all the complicated, messy emotions that came with building a life on top of grief. Winter deepened, and the ranch settled into its cold weather rhythm. Boone and the boys handled the livestock, breaking ice on water troughs and making sure the animals had enough feed. Clara managed the house, cooking and cleaning and making sure everyone stayed warm and healthy. It should have been monotonous, but Clara found beauty in the routine. There was something deeply satisfying about knowing what each day would bring, about having tasks that mattered, about building something stable and lasting. One morning in late December, Clara woke feeling nauseous. She barely made it to the chamber pot before losing her dinner from the night before. Boone hovered anxiously while she heaved, and when she finally sat back, pale and shaking, his expression was knowing. How long? He asked quietly. Clara's hands went to her stomach instinctively. I don't know. Maybe 6 weeks? 2 months? She'd suspected for a while now. Her monthly bleeding hadn't come, and her breasts were tender, and she'd been tired in a way that felt different from regular exhaustion. But she'd been too scared to say it out loud, too afraid of what it might mean. You're pregnant, Boone said, and his voice held wonder and terror in equal measure. Maybe. Probably. Clara looked up at him. Are you upset? Upset? Clara, He sat down hard on the floor beside her. I'm terrified. After what happened with Anne, I swore I'd never put another woman through that. Never risk it. Clara's heart sank. So you don't want this baby? That's not what I said. Boone took her hands. I want this baby. I want a family with you. I want everything. But I'm scared out of my mind that something will go wrong and I'll lose you the way I lost her. Clara understood that fear. She felt it too. The terror of childbirth, of all the things that could go wrong, of dying and leaving this family she'd only just found. "We'll be careful," she said. "We'll get Sarah involved early. We'll do everything right." Anne did everything right, and she still died. "I know." Clara squeezed his hands. "But we can't live our whole lives afraid of what might happen. We just have to deal with what is happening. And what's happening is we're going to have a baby." Boone pulled her into his arms, careful and gentle, and Clara felt him shaking. "I can't lose you. I won't survive it again." "You won't lose me. I'm too stubborn to die." "You said that before you got shot, and I'm still here, aren't I?" Clara pulled back to look at him. "I survived Red Hollow, survived Harlan, survived a bullet through the shoulder. I can survive this too." Over the next weeks, word of Clara's pregnancy spread through the valley. Sarah came by regularly to check on her, giving advice and reassurance. The neighboring ranch wives sent over remedies for morning sickness, most of which didn't work, but Clara appreciated the gesture. Even people from Red Hollow sent congratulations, which surprised her. "You're one of them now," Sarah explained. "A rancher's wife, co-owner of property, mother to the Callahan children. They have to accept you whether they like it or not." The children reacted to the news with predictable enthusiasm. Rosie immediately started planning what she'd teach the baby. Ethan wanted to know if it would be a boy or girl, and even Wyatt showed cautious excitement. "Will you still be our mama after the baby comes?" Rosie asked one night. Clara pulled her onto her lap. "Still possible, though getting more difficult as her belly grew." "Of course I will. Having a new baby doesn't change how I feel about you three. You'll always be my first children. Promise?" "I promise." But as winter turned to spring and Clara's belly swelled, fear grew alongside the baby. She tried to hide it, but Boone saw through her. He became increasingly protective, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a coffee cup, hovering constantly until Clara wanted to scream. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she snapped one afternoon when he tried to carry her upstairs. "I know, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about Anne, but I'm not Anne, and this isn't the same situation. You don't know that. Neither do you." Clara softened her tone. "Boone, you have to let me live my life. I can't spend the next 4 months wrapped in cotton batting because you're scared." He ran his hands through his hair, frustrated and frightened. "Tell me how to not be terrified." "You can't. I'm terrified too. But we can't let fear run our lives." It was Sarah who finally got through to him. "Boone Callahan, you listen to me," she said one afternoon when she found him watching Clara hang laundry like she might spontaneously combust. "Your wife is strong and healthy and doing everything right. What happened to Anne was tragic, but it was also rare. The chances of it happening again are slim, but not impossible. Nothing's impossible. Clara could get kicked by a horse tomorrow or fall down the stairs or catch pneumonia. You can't protect her from everything, and trying will just drive you both crazy." Boone knew Sarah was right, but knowing and accepting were different things. Clara watched him struggle with it, saw him force himself to step back and let her do normal tasks, saw the fear in his eyes every time she winced or complained of discomfort. "I love you," she told him one night as they lay in bed, her belly pressed against his side. "And I'm going to be fine. We're both going to be fine." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to make it true." Spring came late that year, the snow finally melting in early April. The garden came back to life with aggressive enthusiasm, and Clara spent hours on her knees weeding and planting, ignoring Boone's protests that she should be resting. "This is resting," she insisted. "I'm sitting down, aren't I?" The baby moved inside her now, little flutters that became stronger kicks as the weeks passed. She'd catch Boone staring at her belly with a mixture of wonder and terror, and she'd take his hand and place it where the baby was kicking, watching his face soften with love and fear. In late May, when the mountains were green again and the garden was producing more vegetables than they could eat, Clara's water broke while she was making bread. She stood in the kitchen, flour-covered hands frozen in dough, staring at the puddle spreading across the floor. "Boone," she said quietly. He appeared in the doorway, took one look at her, and went white. "Is it? The baby's coming. Get Sarah, now." The next hours were a blur of pain and fear, and Sarah's calm voice talking her through contractions. Boone stayed beside her, holding her hand, letting her squeeze hard enough to leave bruises. The children were sent to stay with a neighboring ranch, and Clara was grateful they wouldn't see her like this, sweating, screaming, completely undone. "You're doing great," Sarah kept saying. "Just breathe through it. You're almost there." But Clara wasn't almost there. The labor dragged on for hours, and she could see Boone getting more terrified with each passing minute. Could see him remembering Anne, remembering how it had gone wrong, preparing himself to lose another wife. "I'm not dying," Clara gasped between contractions. "Stop looking at me like I'm dying. I'm not—" "You are. And it's freaking me out, so stop it." Sarah actually laughed. "She's got fight in her still. That's a good sign." As the sun set outside, painting the bedroom in orange and gold, Clara finally felt the overwhelming urge to push. She bore down with everything she had, screaming loud enough to rattle the windows, and Sarah's face broke into a huge smile. "There's the head. One more push, Clara. One more, and you're done." Clara looked at Boone, at his terrified, hopeful, devastated face, and gathered every ounce of strength she had left. She pushed. The baby slid free in a rush of blood and fluid, and Sarah caught it with practiced hands. For one horrible second, there was no sound except Clara's ragged breathing. Then the baby screamed, loud and angry, and very much alive. "It's a girl," Sarah announced, tears streaming down her face. "A healthy baby girl." Clara burst into tears as Sarah placed the squalling infant on her chest. The baby was perfect, tiny and red and furious at being born, but perfect. Clara looked down at her daughter and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of love. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "Hi, sweet girl. I'm your mama." Boone was crying too, his face buried in Clara's neck, his whole body shaking. "You're alive. You're both alive. Told you I was too stubborn to die." Sarah cleaned them both up, checked Clara for tears and bleeding, and declared everything perfect. "You did beautifully, both of you." When the children came home the next day, they crowded around the bed to meet their new sister. Rosie was enchanted. Ethan was curious but slightly worried about the crying, and Wyatt just stared at the tiny baby like she was a miracle. "What are you going to name her?" he asked. Clara looked at Boone and they shared a silent conversation. They discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. "Anne Rose," Clara said finally. "Anne for your first mama, and Rose for Rosie." She'd worried the name might be too much, might feel like she was trying to replace someone irreplaceable. But Wyatt's face crumpled, and he burst into tears. The first time Clara had seen him cry since that day she took the bullet. "She would have loved that," he choked out. "Mama would have loved that you named the baby after her." Clara pulled him close with her free arm, the baby cradled against her chest, and let him cry. "Your mama gave me all of you. The least I can do is honor her memory." That night, after everyone had settled and the baby was sleeping in the cradle Boone had built, Clara lay in bed feeling the ache of childbirth and the satisfaction of survival. "We did it," she whispered. Boone kissed her forehead. "You did it. You were incredible. We're a family now, a real family. Not just making do or surviving, but actually whole. We were whole before. We were healing. Now we're whole." Clara looked at the cradle where baby Anne slept. "She's the proof that we're not just surviving tragedy. We're building something new." As spring turned to summer and baby Anne grew from a squalling newborn into a slightly less squalling infant, life at the ranch found a new rhythm. Clara learned to nurse while cooking, to change diapers while supervising the older children's chores, to function on far less sleep than any human should need. Boone was a different man than he'd been with his first children, more present, more involved, more willing to walk the floor with a crying baby at 2 a.m. Clara would wake to find him sitting in the rocking chair with Anne against his shoulder, talking to her quietly about the ranch and the mountains, and how lucky she was to have such a fierce mother. The older children adjusted to sharing their parents' attention. Rosie appointed herself the baby's protector, Ethan liked to make faces to get Anne to smile, and Wyatt surprised everyone by being gentle and patient in ways he'd never been before. One evening in late July, Clara stood on the porch watching her family. Boone and the boys were in the pasture with the horses. Rosie was in the garden picking tomatoes. Baby Anne slept in a basket at Clara's feet, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. This was her life now. This was what she'd fought for, survived for, bled for. Sarah appeared on horseback, as she often did these days, and dismounted with a knowing smile. "You look content," she observed. "I am. Is that allowed?" "It's required." Sarah sat in the other rocking chair. I have news from town. Clara tensed. What kind of news? Pike's bank finally went under. He's leaving Red Hollow, moving back east to live with family. And Martha Green's husband left her for a woman half her age, so she's not in any position to gossip about anyone. Clara should have felt vindicated, should have enjoyed the cosmic justice of her enemies facing their own struggles. Instead, she just felt tired. That's sad, she said quietly. Sarah looked surprised. You feel sorry for them? After everything they did to you? I feel sorry for anyone who's so miserable they have to make other people small to feel big. Clara picked up the baby, who was starting to fuss. They spent so much energy hating me, and for what? I moved on, built a life. They're still stuck in the same place, eating bitterness for breakfast. You're a better woman than I am. I'm just tired of anger. It takes too much energy, and I'd rather use that energy loving my family. It was true. Somewhere between the fence and the gunshot and the childbirth, Clara had let go of the rage that had sustained her through the worst moments. Not because those people deserved forgiveness, but because carrying that weight was exhausting. She'd rather be free. As summer deepened and the ranch flourished, Clara found herself thinking about the girl she'd been a year ago. Tied to a fence, convinced her life was over, certain she'd die unmourned and forgotten. That girl would never believe where she'd ended up, would never believe she could be loved, could matter, could build something beautiful from the ruins of her father's failures. But here Clara was, living proof that people could change, that circumstances didn't define you forever, that hitting bottom didn't mean you had to stay there. One night, Boone found her in the garden after everyone had gone to bed. She was standing among the tomato plants, just breathing in the smell of earth and growing things. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. "Remembering," Clara said, "thinking about how different everything is now." Better different or worse different? She turned to face him, this man who'd saved her in more ways than one. "So much better it scares me sometimes." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I spent so long believing I didn't deserve good things. And now I have more good things than I know what to do with, and part of me keeps waiting for someone to realize there's been a mistake." Boone pulled her close, and Clara pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "There's no mistake," he said firmly. "You earned this. Every bit of it. You fought for it, bled for it, survived for it. Nobody gave you anything you didn't work for." "I didn't work for you. You just appeared." "I didn't appear. I saw someone who needed help and decided to do something about it. You did the rest." He tilted her face up. "You saved yourself, Clara. I just gave you a safe place to land while you did it." They stood together in the garden while stars emerged overhead, and Clara thought about survival and salvation and the thin line between the two. She'd survived Red Hollow, survived her father's debts, survived Harlan and the gunshot and childbirth. But more than that, she'd learned to live, really live, not just exist. And that was worth more than all the gold in California. The next morning, Clara was making breakfast when Wyatt came downstairs carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I made you something," he said, setting it on the table. Clara unwrapped it carefully and found a wooden frame he'd carved himself. Inside was a drawing, rough but recognizable, of the whole family standing in front of the house. Boone and Clara in the center, the 4 children arranged around them, even baby Anne rendered as a bundle in Clara's arms. At the bottom, carved into the wood, were the words, "The Callahan family, complete at last." Clara burst into tears right there in the kitchen. "Do you like it?" Wyatt asked nervously. "I love it." Clara pulled him into a fierce hug. "I love it so much, thank you." "You're welcome, Mama." It was the first time he'd called her that without the Clara qualifier. Just Mama. Simple and perfect and right. Clara hung the picture above the fireplace, right next to the "Home at Last" sign the children had made for the wedding. Together, they told the story of a family built from broken pieces, held together by stubborn love and the refusal to give up. That afternoon, a rider came up the valley road. Clara tensed instinctively. Riders still made her nervous after Harlan, but this one was alone and riding at a casual pace. He turned out to be a marshal from Carson City, coming to deliver news. "Jace Harlan was hanged 2 weeks ago," he told Boone while Clara listened from the porch. "Wanted to make sure you folks knew. He won't be bothering anyone anymore." Boone thanked him, and the marshal rode away, leaving them with the finality of it. Clara should have felt something. Relief, joy, vindication. Instead, she just felt empty. Harlan was dead, and her father was dead, and all the people who'd ever hurt her were either gone or diminished, and none of it mattered because she'd already moved on. She'd already won, not by destroying her enemies, but by building something they could never touch. As autumn approached and baby Anne learned to smile and the older children prepared for another school year, Clara found herself thinking about legacy, about what she was leaving behind, not just for her own children, but for anyone who might hear her story and need to believe that things could get better. She'd been the girl tied to a fence, worthless and alone. Now she was the woman who owned half a ranch, who'd fought off outlaws, who'd survived childbirth and built a family from nothing. She was proof that the worst day of your life didn't have to define you, that you could hit bottom and still climb back up. That being unwanted once didn't mean being unwanted forever. One evening in late September, with the mountains painted gold and red by autumn, Clara gathered the whole family in the parlor. "I want to tell you something," she said, baby Anne asleep in her arms. The older children arranged around her, Boone beside her where he belonged. "What?" Rosie asked, always the most impatient. "I want to tell you that I love you, all of you, more than I ever knew I could love anyone." "We know that, Mama," Ethan said, confused. "I know you know. But I wanted to say it out loud, because a year ago I didn't think I'd be here, didn't think I'd have a family or a home or any reason to wake up in the morning. And now I have all of it, and I don't ever want you to doubt how much it means to me." Wyatt looked at her with understanding beyond his years. "We love you too, Mama, even when you make us eat vegetables." Everyone laughed, and the moment passed, but Clara knew they understood, knew they felt it too, this imperfect, complicated, beautiful thing they'd built together. That night, after everyone was asleep, Clara stood at the window looking out at the ranch. The barn stood strong against the starlight. The garden was preparing for winter. The livestock were safe in their pastures. Everything she'd fought for was here, contained in these few acres of Mountain Valley. Not perfect, not without struggle or pain or the occasional crisis, but hers. Really, truly, permanently hers. Boone came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How far I've come. How far we've all come." "Any regrets?" Clara thought about it honestly. Thought about the gunshot wound that still ached when it rained. Thought about the nightmares she still sometimes had about that fence. Thought about all the hard moments and scared nights and times she'd wanted to give up. "No," she said finally. "Not a single one." Because every hard moment had led her here. Every scar was proof she'd survived. Every fear she'd overcome made her stronger. She'd started as Clara Whitmore, the girl nobody wanted. She'd become Clara Callahan, the woman who refused to stay broken. And that transformation, painful and bloody and hard-won as it was, had been worth every second. The girl at the fence had been dying. The woman at the window was finally, completely alive. And that made all the difference.